Welcome to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament and to the session on the Colloquium on United Nations Resolution 1325. My name is Rashida Beg. I'm the newly appointed secretary. I don't know how long I can say that speak. I'm allowed to be for 3 months. Okay, so it's 1.5 months. My name is Rashida Beg, newly appointed secretary to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here to participate in this discussion. I think there will be a lot of questions around why UN resolution, why WCPP, we are provincial legislature. What is our role in relation to this resolution? And I think part of the discussions today is maybe to drill down to exactly what is the role of our public representatives to address particularly the cause of women. And you will notice the theme around women, peace and security. It's a theme that resonates particularly with our country as well as this province. But I'm not going to be doing all the talking. I'm going to be handing over to my colleague, Bernadette Luthien, and she will introduce herself. She's got too many subtitles and subtitles. I can't keep up with it. So I'm going to hand over to Bernadette.
Thank you, Secretary. Oops, and there goes my name badge. I'm Bernadette Muthian, and I do a number of different things. Among others, I serve on the board of the Institute for African Alternatives, which was an NGO, Pan-African NGO founded by the late Ben Turok, who was a veteran member of parliament, and before that, struggle stalwart. And what today is about is a critical engagement, bringing together of civil society leaders with the legislature and the implementers, as in the executives who are present here today. And we need more of that, especially at a provincial level. I was astonished that some of my colleagues from civil society had never visited your beautiful provincial legislature. And so doing that and domesticating the issue of women, peace and security at this level is of critical importance, and we are most grateful to the legislature and the Speaker and Secretary for having us and hosting us with such generosity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good morning, and molweni goeiemorgen. Welcome to the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. It is a great honor to host you in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament this morning. This is exactly where we are taking the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. This is exactly the purpose of a parliament, where we bring civil society together. We have these kind of discussions that eventually becomes action plans, and that we take the people of the Western Cape forward. So it's a wonderful, wonderful privilege to host you this morning. When the secretary and I had this discussion, I said absolutely we need to bring civil society together. We need to bring the people to Parliament, and that's why I'm also very grateful to my colleagues, the members of Parliament that's present here today. And as you'll see, there's the Chief Whip of Parliament is present, the Chairperson of Social Development is present, the Chairperson of Police Oversight and Community Safety is present. There's members of the various standing committees. There's members online that is present, because to us this is an important discussion. It's an important avenue to use to make sure that whatever we as legislators and as lawmakers do, that we don't do it alone. We don't leave anyone behind, but we also do not we don't make decisions without you as our stakeholders. As part of our strategic plan as the Western Cape Provincial Parliament for the next 5 to 10 years, it's exactly that we don't do Parliament without our people. And so it's a great honor and a privilege, as I said, to host you. I look forward to a very robust discussion, and I think I can say it. I hate talk shops, because from whatever we are discussing here today must become action plans, and how we contribute to the people of the Western Cape, and let us in the Western Cape be an example to the rest of the country as a legislature, but also to the rest of the world. So welcome. Feel free to engage. And once again, Secretary, and to you and to Bernadette, thank you very much for putting this together, for driving this, because this is something that I think it's needed in our country. It's needed in this province, especially at what we are going through. If you open the newspapers, and for the last couple of days, it is sad what is happening to society, and we have an obligation, and that we as lawmakers, but also from human to human, from a humanitarian perspective, to contribute to change the society that we so wish to live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Speaker. That was very moving, actually. We are now needing to go to Teams, the virtual presentation by Sanam Andalini, who is the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN, and the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, which is a global network of women like myself. Literally, I can't even remember how many countries on all continents. So Sanam is going to be speaking on Teams. Are you ready? How's our technical team doing with having the presentation by Sanam on Teams? Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, just a small. Apologies for the delay. We will have Sanam Andalini here shortly. And this WASL is such a fascinating network. It has people in Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, you name it, all concerned with women, peace and security issues, but in really concrete and practical ways, and fighting extremism. Like when in some countries, young children, especially boys, are abducted and coerced into becoming child soldiers. So when you can get your child back, what to do with that child and changing the consciousness from the extreme into, a caring family member and community member, and to heal them from the trauma they've experienced. So some of the work of some of these people, in fact, all of them, is so amazing to many of us. And it's a really interesting journey to be part of this global network.
Secretary, if I may take this opportunity to then also, just for the record, and welcome the leader of the opposition. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge his presence.
Thank you, Speaker.
Camera isn't working. Why?
Okay, it's muted. Oh.
Thank you very much. As I indicated, it is a great honor and a privilege for me to welcome you here today, but even a greater privilege and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, His Excellency former President Kgalema Motlanthe, former President of the Republic of South Africa. Former President Motlanthe was born on the 19th of July in Alexandra Township in Johannesburg. Most of his childhood was spent in Alexandra and most of his adult life was spent in Soweto. Former President Motlanthe worked for the National Union of Mine Workers in charge of education. Among other things, he was involved in training workers to form shop steward committees. In 1992, he was elected NUM General Secretary. He was involved in the establishment of Mine Workers Investment Company, which was owned by Mine Workers Investment Trust, with seed capital of 3 million rand. This has proven to be one of the best examples of effective economic empowerment in the country. When the ANC was unbanned in 1990, he was put in charge of re-establishing the legal structures of the organization of the PWV region and was elected its first chairperson. He often traveled around the country with Walter Sisulu visiting violent flashpoints. He was elected unopposed as the Secretary General of the African National Congress in 1997 and was re-elected in 2002. Among other things, his responsibility included the development of party-to-party relations in the region, across the countries of the South and around the world. In December 2007, he was elected ANC Deputy President at its 52nd National Conference in Polokwane. In July 2008, he was appointed the Minister in the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa, and on the 25th of September 2008 was sworn in as South Africa's third democratically elected president. In the legislative sector, the work concluded by the high-level panel on the assessment of key legislation and the acceleration of fundamental change led by former President Motlanthe still finds traction in ensuring that as legislatures, we track the implementation of legislation. Former President, welcome to the WCPP. We are very privileged to have you today as our keynote speaker, and we look forward to hearing you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oops. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I'm sorry, my camera doesn't seem to come on. My goodness. Okay. All right. Good morning, Honorable Speaker Dalen Michel, and Chief Executive Officer Resida Beck, members of the Provincial Assembly, Consular General of the Netherlands, Ms. Helen Reckers, IFA board member and co-organizer of this event, Ms. Bernadette Muthian, representatives of civil society here present, all advocates for positive change, ladies and gentlemen. It is both a privilege and a serious responsibility to join you today as we reflect on South Africa's draft National Action Plan for the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Adopted in the year 2000, Resolution 1325 was the first of its kind, the first time the UN Security Council recognized that peace and security are inseparable from equality. It recognized women not just as victims of conflict, but as leaders in peace building, conflict prevention, and recovery. It remains a global framework that compels every nation to act, reminding us that sustainable peace cannot be built while half of humanity is excluded. The resolution affirms that women's leadership is essential to ending cycles of violence and building just and lasting peace. Yet, we must be candid, The relevance of Resolution 1325 today lies precisely in the fact that international law is too often disregarded. Across the world, we see conflicts raging, wars waged with impunity, and genocide. The devastating impact is borne disproportionately by women through displacement, hunger, sexual violence, and the destruction of family and community life. It appears that there is little accountability when these crimes are committed, and that failure weakens both law and justice. Resolution 1325 cannot remain a symbolic declaration. It must be a living document, one that obliges nations to act, and one that ensures accountability when women's rights are violated in war as well as in peace. Additionally, Resolution 1325 should not be examined, understood, and implemented in isolation. South Africa, given our own history, has a moral duty to lead by example and domesticate Resolution 1325 in our own legislative frameworks, while also insisting that the international community is held to account for its obligations. Without accountability, law becomes a dead letter, which in essence becomes ineffectual in promoting and protecting the rights of those who are marginalized in society. For Resolution 1325 to be accessible and relevant within each nation and community, it should be interpreted within historical context and in relation to both domestic and international charters. South Africa's historical context is steeped with examples that have inspired the Bill of Rights in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. For instance, the 1923 ANC African Bill of Rights, Social Conditions of African Women and Girls, delivered in 1930 by Charlotte Maxeke, the Women's Charter of 1954, the Constitutional Principles of the ANC Women's League of 1992, a Bill of Rights for New South Africa in 1993, and the Women's Charter for Effective Equality in 1994. In other words, a culture of developing policy towards inclusiveness has evolved and developed I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize my phone is on. In other words, a culture of developing policy towards inclusiveness has evolved and developed in South Africa over a period of 100 years, and this history may help us to deepen our awareness of and response to the enduring challenges and injustices of today. Moreover, Resolution 1325 articulates particular concern for the well-being and rights of children. Point number 9 of the resolution calls upon all parties to armed conflict to respect fully international law applicable to the rights and protection of women and girls, especially as civilians, in particular the obligations applicable to them under, among others, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child of 1989. However, South Africa has inconsistently recognized children's rights over the past century. On the one hand, South Africa was an early and active leader in the recognition of children's rights in the international community. The Union of South Africa was a founding member of the League of Nations and voted to endorse the first major international instrument recognizing children's rights, the 1924 Declaration of the Rights of the Child. Although South Africa established itself as a leader in the international community, the rise of apartheid policies after World War II led to a widespread failure to respect those same rights domestically. South Africa's repeated violations of human rights and children's rights alienated the country from the international community. In 1979, South Africa was not allowed to participate in the drafting or adoption of the Declaration on the Rights and Welfare of the African Child by the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the Organization of African Unity, also known as the African Children's Declaration. Just 3 years prior, children who demonstrated against Afrikaans as a medium of instruction were brutally suppressed in what was to be known as the Soweto uprisings. The peaceful demonstrations that followed became violent when the apartheid army and police opened fire on students. Ultimately, hundreds of young people were killed or injured. In 1992, over 200 South African children met in this province of the Western Cape at the International Summit on the Rights of Children to address the violation of their rights and discuss the problems they continue to face following the end of apartheid. Their discussions led to the drafting of the Children's Charter of South Africa, which asserted that children were not being included in the nation's transition to a constitutional democracy, and that children's rights were not on the agendas of either the government or any of the political parties. However, rights and resolutions on paper must translate into rights and freedoms in practice. Our Constitution is not only a legal document, it is a moral and political framework that affirms dignity, equality, and justice. Yet these values are only realized when governance is inclusive, accountable, and participatory. Public participation must not be a grand ceremonial gesture. It must always be the lifeblood of democracy, and young people deserve a seat at the decision-making table. Additionally, social justice and social change are the battlegrounds of social movements, which make up part of civil society, including women and youth movements that give dignity to those who are suffering and amplify the voices of those who are marginalized. Policy implementation must be local, measurable, and responsive to the lived realities of those we represent. Thus, the intentional representation of women in peace negotiations, security sector reform, and post-conflict reconstruction means carving larger spaces for women and youth movements, especially in rural areas. As public representatives and servants, our highest calling is to serve with integrity, humility, and a deep sense of responsibility to the people of this country. In this, our political consciousness must be sharpened through greater participation and deliberateness of all participants at parliamentary workshops, such as today's colloquium. The courage and conviction to engage in honest, robust dialogue is demonstrated in the way we amplify the voices of those we represent. The evolution of a constitutional democracy to fully realize resolutions such as Resolution 1325 depend on our accountability as public representatives and public office bearers to work with all sectors of society. And I would thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Honorable Motlanthe, who is also the chair of the Institute for African Alternatives, one of the partners of the event, and the other partner of the event, civil society partner, is Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, who are working on our national action plan pertaining to this matter. Now we are going to go to our International Civil Society Action Network, CEO Sanam Andalini, who is on Teams.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you, everybody. It is an honor, truly, to be joining you. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. I wanted to talk to you about two things. One, the past, and then second, the present and where we go with this agenda. And I start with the past because I was involved in mobilizing civil society globally to achieve 1325 Resolution 1325 25 years ago. And I want to first of all thank South Africa, because if it hadn't been for the work of women in South Africa in terms of negotiations and participation in the transition process, in terms of the contributions to and shaping security sector reform in the 1990s and so forth, the inspiration and the belief that it is possible not only to have women participate, but to have a process that goes from a system of apartheid or a system of dictatorship, if you want, to democracy without going through a massive civil war. The idea of that would have seemed imaginary, but South Africa anchored it for us. I'm Iranian by background, and in the 30 years that I've been doing this work globally, your story continues to inspire me, despite all the difficulties that you've had subsequently and so forth. But the South African story is central to this agenda and to the agenda of human security within which WPS sits. So I want to thank you for that and for this opportunity. Secondly, I wanted to say that as we mark the 25 years of this agenda, there are three things that I think are useful for us to remember. So number one, civil society was critical to this agenda. This agenda did not get written, or it was not born in the conference rooms of the UN or governments. It was a global mobilization of women from conflict zones, women at the front lines of dealing with war, dealing with violence, being armed, mediating, negotiating, really living that experience, collectively coming together and saying, we want to have a say both for our own futures, but for the futures of our children and our countries. The agenda isn't just about wanting peace for women. It is about women being central to the idea of peace and security and shaping it for the men and boys and their entire communities as well. So this is the civil society sits very strongly at the core of this. Second, of course, is that we couldn't have done it without a collaborative relationship with governments and the UN. And this, the way in which we mobilized and the way in which this agenda has evolved, in many ways, the greatest potential is when we bring the strengths of each sector together and complement each other. And this is what we need to continue to do going forward, because sometimes, at least in my work with the UN over the years, I found that the bureaucracy becomes overwhelming and it's taken over the spirit and the word of the agenda. So we need to anchor it back in practice and practicality and in the lived experiences of people on the ground. But governments and the United Nations system are critical and pivotal, so long as they hold hands on an equal basis with civil society to get the work done. The third thing, which often gets forgotten, is that Namibia, which held the presidency in October of 2000, played a pivotal role and a very strategic role by linking what we as civil society had asked for. We wanted participation of women in peace processes, protection issues, recovery and post-conflict gender responsiveness. But what they did, which was really, really critical from an African perspective, was to link it to the peacekeeping agenda and to the Windhoek Declaration and the importance of having women peacekeepers and gender-sensitive peacekeeping globally to avoid issues of sexual abuse and exploitation internationally as well. This problem still persists. Recently, a report was published by the UN. There are over 600 cases of SEA, sexual exploitation and abuse, within the UN system just last year. So it's important to bring it back to the issue that this is meant to be about agency of women, but also protection of women, and for the betterment of peace for all. And Namibia's role, I think, is really important for us to recognize, and again, putting Africa at the center of the agenda. Now, what we've done at ICANN, and so this is what I wanted to share with you. I founded ICANN in 2006 with the purpose of bringing the vision and the hope and the promise of 1325 to life, working directly with civil society partners. We convene and spearhead the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WASL, which means connect in many languages. And what we do within our network is we bring together women who are women's organizations that are active in peace building and security work globally together, to learn from each other, to show solidarity, to enhance their activism. And at ICANN, we enable their access to different political arenas and policy arenas, but we also run a fund to enable their innovative peace work. Our fund is called the Innovative Peace Fund, and we have supported partners in over 26 countries so far. In 2020, to mark the 20th anniversary of this agenda, we launched collectively the She Builds Peace campaign. And the idea behind She Builds Peace is that we need to get recognition and understanding of what a woman peace builder is and how they work, and the nature of the work that peace building entails. It overlaps with human rights work, it overlaps with development and economic and livelihoods work, but peace building is very specific in terms of both the risks associated with it in polarized societies and the mentality and the approach that you bring to the table in terms of trying to find resolution and transformation of conflict within societies. Again, I don't need to explain it to you in South Africa because you have been the leaders in the world for many of us. But She Builds Peace for us is a really important vehicle because it not only centers women peace builders that exist and gives recognition to them, but it has been a means for our partners to reach out into their own communities across the world, from Brazil to Liberia to Cameroon to Indonesia and Iraq and Yemen, over 30 countries right now, for them to reach out into their own communities, working with their own security forces, their own local governments, and also deep inside grassroots, very marginalized communities where what we've discovered, again, not surprisingly, but what we've discovered is that women have been natural peacemakers and peace builders, not in an essentialist way, but in a very practical way. In Brazil, our partners are finding that when they go to the favelas where there is gang violence, it is often the women who are saying that they are negotiating and trying to mitigate the violence, and they're dealing with the police and they're dealing with the gangs, and they're trying to protect their sons and their children from the violence. And by enabling to see themselves as peace builders, it has given such confidence, and it has given them a sense of belonging to a wider global community. And to me, what this tells us is that this work of peace building and mediating and negotiating at that local level is indigenous, it is authentic to our various cultures across the world, but it has been invisibilized over the decades, especially with state systems coming into play. So in a way, our state structures have kind of marginalized and tried to bureaucratize and technocratize work that is being inherently done at local levels. And at this juncture in history, when we have so many different problems, gang violence, transnational crime, identity movements that are weaponizing identity, these types of things, A state alone cannot cope. State entities, security actors alone cannot deal with these issues. They don't have access to the communities and places where this kind of violence is festering. So we need that collaboration between civil society and government to be strengthened again, and to genuinely be seen as allies, not adversaries, but well-resourced and respected. And this is part of the campaign that we are leading globally, locally rooted, but globally connected. A second aspect of the work, and again, this for me brings it back to South Africa, is that sitting in Europe as I am right now, we are seeing an extreme level of militarization and an arms race evolving, and it is decimating the peace building and international development, but economic and social development, both in our own societies, but also internationally. And a lot of our work at ICANN and with our partners has been on the focus of pushing back against the militarization of humanity and focusing on humanizing security. We all need our police to work. We need our border patrols, and we need our army to be well defined and defending against external forces. But we must be very careful about militarization that seeps inside our own societies and then becomes, in a way, the enemy of our own people. I can tell you, both as an Iranian and as an American citizen, and actually in Britain, that we are seeing this. And what we would look to, and maybe this is my request to you in South Africa, is that you, having endured, you've understood, you have experienced this in the past. You have an incredible history of bringing human security to the fore of national policy, and so I end with a request that we would really welcome a collaboration on a global level with you and other countries that are concerned about peace and inclusive peace and security and human security and justice, to join together with us in civil society and other governments around the world to be a voice and a coalition to push back against the militarization, but to really stand for human security and human rights and pluralism in our world today. So I hope that this can be the future of the WPS agenda. It has certainly been the hope, the anchor of it and its roots, and it's more necessary and more relevant than ever to have partners like South Africa in this journey. Thank you very much.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is my visionary colleague and friend, Sanam, and thank you very much for joining us. I am now going to be less entertaining and go technical on you, and I'm going to refer to your lovely gift bags, which the people in the room have, and in it you will find the actual UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It's not long, and I encourage you to give it a quick scan. And then the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, who has been driving the National Action Plan, has given us 2 additional publications, including a baseline study. So those are the references, and now I'm going to do some technical inputs so that we know when we come to the discussion that we on the same page. So in a nutshell, what is UN Security Council Resolution 1325? It pertains to conflict and violence. And we know that violence affects women and girls differently. My comments are based on the work of my good colleague and friend, Professor Cheryl Hendricks, who is the director of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. So women and girls are differently affected and often worse affected by conflict and violence. If we think of gangsterism on the Cape Flats, women and girls experience it differently and worse than boys and men, for example. So the critical thing for us for this, why we have this resolution, is that it highlights the importance of women being inside the room, being part of the conversation, a critical part of the conversation about conflict resolution and peace building, which is why it's so exciting that the province's committee chair and the MEC or minister both are women. This resolution has 4 pillars, and I'll run through it very quickly. I'm not going to bore you terribly. Just bear with me. 4 pillars. The first is participation, active engagement. The second is prevention. How do we prevent conflict? before it even starts. And protection, how do we protect survivors of violence? And then we're talking about relief and recovery, things in practical terms for us, like how do we support Tutuzela care centers in our community? In terms of participation, are our policies, infrastructure, and practice, are these gender sensitive? Do we actively encourage women to participate? Do we actively encourage communities to participate? The provincial legislature, in all its beauty, many community leaders have never been here. They've been to national parliament, but not provincial parliament. How do we make this beautiful space their space too, which they can own? The second pillar is around peace building architecture. How do we create the infrastructure necessary, safer societies? How do we inculcate a culture of peace and non-violence? Even in the way in which we speak, do we communicate non-violently as opposed to yelling at each other in the middle of a stressful day? How do we actively prevent conflict? In terms of protection, who do we want to protect? Obviously, the most vulnerable. Then relief and recovery, we need to strengthen the relief centers and the programs for survivors, like the Tutuzela care centers. Now, the National Action Plan, which the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation has been working with, is state-centered. It's a United Nations resolution, which then goes to governments, and the governments must domesticate it, which is why we have national action plans. So it's very state-centered. This one is located in DIRCO, our International Relations Department, with some interdepartmental committee which does the technical work, and it's supported by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, UN Women, etc. But what it needs, critically, it needs legislative oversight. It needs your inputs, both as legislators and as executives that implement the legislation. It needs community oversight, and more so than community oversight, it needs community ownership. It must become our action plan that we as women and men as allies implement. So the women in this Women, Peace and Security, I want to assert, are precisely you, and me. All of us, we must own this program. And that, in a nutshell, is my technical input. And I'm now going to go to the provincial government, our hard-working executives. Shall we start with the Department of the Premier? Is Harry Malila here? Oh dear, Harry Malila is running late, apologies. Department of Police, Oversight and Community Safety, Anthea Michaels.
Who's do I ask for speaker? As I stand on a podium. Honorable Speaker, members, ladies and gentlemen, the Department of Police Oversight and Community Safety hereby wishes to express its acceptance of the Security Council's 4,213th meeting held on 31 October 2000 in relation to Resolution 1325 and further reiterates the urgent need to mainstream a gender perspective into all peacekeeping and peace-building initiatives. As stated, Resolution 1325 reaffirms the important role of women in the prevention and resolution of conflicts, peace negotiations, peace building, peacekeeping, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict reconstruction, and stresses the importance of the equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. The department is, however, cognizant that more than 20 years after the resolution, progress since its adoption has been underwhelming and the role of women underestimated.
Ladies and gentlemen, a number of studies indicate that the potential losses of not including women in peace-building processes are immense. Desiree Nielsen, in her article published in 2012, entitled Anchoring Peace, shows that when civil society actors are included in peace agreements, the risk of peace failing is reduced by 64%. So as conflict is gendered, so is peace building. Gender conflict can be described as the discrepancy of women and men experience between the different roles that they play in modern society. Society is defined by a struggle for dominance among social groups that compete for scarce resources. Thus, in the context of gender, conflict theory argues that gender is best understood as men attempting to maintain power and privilege to the detriment of women. From a Western Cape government perspective, lots can be said and has been shared statistically. However, I want to share the lived realities and experiences of our own societal conflicts. These are our armed conflicts, where local women, mothers, gogos, unemployed single moms are at the forefront of daily peacekeeping due to gang wars, gender-based violence, and extortion, amongst others, occurring in our own communities, neighborhoods, and streets. This is not a call up for women to respond. It has sadly become an everyday duty and responsibility. As a department, we have recognized the need to embark on localized safety and security interventions to support the South African Police Service. This is done through the accreditation of safety structures that are funded, trained, and resourced. There are currently 519 accredited safety structures in the province. 505 are neighborhood watch structures, and 14 are farm watch structures. Of these structures, 148 are led by female chairpersons, with neighborhood watch structures consisting of between 70 to 80% female patrollers. 2 neighborhood watch structures are comprised of only females. They are the Tambo Village Women Patrollers Neighborhood Watch in Manenberg and the Bito Women for Change Neighborhood Watch in Kwanokatula. I think at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we need to applaud them for this brave and awesome that they've done in our community. What I further want to share with you is a recent interview I had with Mr. Ronel Botus. Ronel is a safety officer of the Dussenberg Neighborhood Watch located on the N7 and surrounds and covers 3 precincts of police stations, Atlantis, Malmesbury, and Philadelphia. They have 120 patrollers, of which 95% are females, and led by a female chairperson, with the oldest patroller being 75 years old. This neighborhood watch is in existence for more than 10 years and was established by the community due to the increase in crime and violence. And I want to add, with little to no support from law enforcement. It is also not accredited by the department and receives no government or business funding. They operate purely through their own fundraising. And their motto is very simple: caring for everybody to make it work. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a perfect example of a successful local intervention championed by women to fight crime. In this instance, the pursuit of a common cause is the starting point, not the end point, as it is so often in policing strategies. These powerful interventions are based on knowledge about the stakeholders and the local dynamics at play. They employ creative efforts to address the underlying causes that have given rise to violence. One of the most striking features of the safety structures mentioned above that are led by women is that they have the capacity to mobilize across racial, religious, class, and other differences. They have joined forces because of their shared experiences and common demands in the context of conflict, what they experience every day. In conclusion, the department would like to iterate that women's peacebuilding initiatives, both formal and informal, need to be accounted for and incorporated into a broader definition of crime fighting and crime prevention to ensure a more lasting peace. And who better to consult than those who know their local dynamics best? I thank you.
Advocate Anthea Michaels, thank you for an excellent presentation, which we hope we'll receive afterwards, and excellent timekeeping as well. From the provincial government, we have the Department of Social Development's Liana Goosen and Rene Botha now. Thank you very much. And please, in the gallery, could people turn their phones on silent? Groot asseblief.
Then we have the presentation just loaded a bit bigger, please.
So we're just waiting for the PowerPoint of the presenters to be loaded. And there it goes.
I'm not going to look at the presentation. I can't see that far. Otherwise, I have to put in my sunglasses to see that distance. So my colleague will take you along in the presentation. Good morning, I'm Liana Goosen. I'm the Chief Director of Social Welfare and Restorative Services. Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me the opportunity then to speak to this, this very challenging but necessary matter. Since 2019, 2020, this department have spent 114 million on approximately 63,483 gender-based violence victims, just in the Western Cape. And it's not, we're only touching the tip of the iceberg. And that is figures that must let us lie awake at night. I want to take us a bit back on memory lane, and that is when the president of Theatre in Durban and of the civil society in 2018 took to the streets and said, enough is enough, my body, my own. He finally held his own in Durban. And then in the Parliament of 2019, he said then, enough is enough. And from then, the national strategy on the fight against national gender-based violence have been born. And then soon after that, the Western Cape government responded and adopted that strategy, and we tailor-made it to fit our context here in South Africa. And we're glad to say it's still going along full steam ahead. So what I'm going to look at is the amount of policies that are involved in fighting this, because that people think there's one paper. It isn't. There's so many policies that we need to, legislation pieces that we have to look at. And then I'm also going to look at the National Strategic Plan. People hear about it. Just quickly take you through the main focus pillars. We're going to look at the outcomes of our geo-mapping, where we map persons accessing services across the province so that we also can align our resources accordingly. We're going to look at our victim empowerment program, and then the latest celebration where the whole of the provincial society on foot sole, there where the tacky strikes the tear, are involved. So this has become a whole of province, and it's not someday the provincial cabinet said we must do this thing. It sounds nice. Now, the Department of Social Development is the lead department, but it didn't stop here. Through the National Strategic Plan and the provincial one, all provincial departments are responsible and co-responsible for the execution of that plan. And we are just coordinating it. And that's the lady there, Nicolette Ras, that is our coordinator. And she will pester you until you have something to deliver. Gender mainstreaming is for us, remains a constant theme in all our training and roll out to municipalities, even traffic cops, all across the province. Whoever wants us to send out the message, we do it. And then we also have strong collaboration with Department of Justice, National Prosecuting Authority, police, and I've added also Home Affairs to that, because we also have foreign nationals that are victim of gender-based violence. The Western Cape have a few excellence models. One is the Tutuzela Care Center. Other one is to work on victim-friendly rooms in consultation with the police. You know, when you stand there and you have to tell your story in front of everybody else in the police station while the blood is running down your legs. So if ever in your communities you want to get involved, that's a place to start, is your local victim support rooms. And then our Kusaleka One-Stop Center. We're the first one in the province where that center is run by the NGO sector and not government, which means it's much more accessible and much more manpower in terms of commitment can be given. You know, governments close this most down at a certain stage of the day. and the rest of the model is rendered by government in the rest of the country. And we this week have a delegation from KZN, and it seems like they are very interested in adopting the same model that we are. They're currently visiting that. Just looking at the legislation, there's a Trafficking in Persons legislation, Older Persons Act, because the elderly is subject to a severe abuse, Domestic Violence Act, the Victim of Service Charter for Victims of Crime. There's the Children's Act, the Child Justice Act, the Victim Support Services Bill, and what you see here is it's vulnerable persons, but there's also the crime prevention element, because we can put all women that need and children that need safety, and I'm going to speak to men right at the end, that need safety in shelters and places and so on, but they must return in the end to the community. So if we don't address where the perpetrator is and what's happening in that home, it will be a cycle that will just go on. The National Strategic Plan, and I'm not going to read this side, you can read the official side. As I said, we have a GBV implementation focal person, which is Nicolette Ras. She coordinated the GBV STARS team internal to DSD and then all the external provincial departments, which means that police and all that justice and all of them are not involved. So we have to make an effort to involve them in the pillars, which I'm going to speak to now, where we can, you know, draw them into task teams and so on. But this was a provincial government acceptance. We couldn't wait for national department to join us. We just had to go forward. We participate on the Human Rights Committee and liaise with others. The directorate within also do a lot of gender work, which include the LGBTQ community as well as other marginalized groups like persons with disability and so forth. Then we do a lot of capacity building, and I must say it's a growing need. My staff are out of office now more and on the road than ever before, and they're so dedicated. I don't even know half the time of where they are because they're always somewhere spreading the message and empowering people. Again, it's the whole of Western Cape's responsibility. And then we also do GBV assessments in the municipalities. And that is a partnership that is growing. And just to announce, tomorrow, through a partnership with Theewaterskloof Municipality and our department, the shelter recently opened, and we're going to celebrate that. We will continue funding that shelter as from the 1st of September. So that is an event that we are looking forward to. Now, in terms of how does this National Strategic Plan look, it currently consists of 6 pillars. They're working on a 7th pillar, but until they have clarified it, we will focus all our work on the 6. It's about accountability, coordination, and leadership, and prevention and rebuilding and social cohesion, justice, safety, and protection. So you will see that's where we call in our national counterparts in police, justice, the NPA, and SAPS. Response, care, support, and healing. Social development is one of the key role players in that pillar. Economic empowerment through the Department of Economic, I can't remember the name, Economic Development, they lead that, and then research and information management. And under information management, we've launched about the past 3 years, a geo-mapping exercise where we can see trends developing throughout the province. And 6 of those trends are in the urban area, and 4 growing trends is emerging in the the rural areas. And we had a fright the other day when we focused in on Oudtshoorn. So in the next slide, you will see that Oudtshoorn is the highest, the top at risk area for gender-based violence currently. Atlantis, Kannaland, Theewaterskloof, Delft, Mitchells Plain, Brede Valley, Fischhoek, Langa, and Athlone. That's where we, through our geomapping year on year, see a growth in the prevalence of gender-based violence. So what does it mean? Means that all the provincial departments that are now involved in the National Strategic Plan can prioritize these services. For instance, cultural affairs and sports. They can now, get children and victims and perpetrators into more sustainable programs and activities in order for them not to sit and drink and shebeens and so on. And they can manage the issuing of liquor licenses, for instance. DSD, from our side, we can see that there is sufficient social workers. Tutuzela Care Center maybe be developed there, and a shelter nearby to provide the necessary accommodation. So that guides our resources. Otherwise, we say, oh, the province is so big, where do I start? And this is the 10 places where we need to start and are busy in. I know data is sometimes a daunting thing, but if you use it to direct your services, it's very helpful. Then people ask about the types of shelters, and I'm glad to announce that with the Tomorrow Shelter, we will have 26 shelters, of which we launched the last 7 since 2020. So each year we've opened a shelter. And I must say the first 3 was very quick in 2020, 2021. And we have 400 first stage services. First of all, it's an emergency shelter. We just stay a short while. We stabilize you. We see that you have all your things is protected. You can start making contact with police and what. Then you have we have 400 people that we've assisted in the first stage shelter. That is 3 to 4 months, and most of the and it's also over and above the psychosocial support. We also start with skills development and reintegration back into the community. And of that, 432 only then moved on to the second stage shelter. As you can see, people need about 3 months to stabilize themselves and see light and hope again, and be able then to become economically independently functioning. At the emergency shelter, we have on average 42 beds filled at any point in time. We also introduced the trafficking in persons, where some of our shelters are now co-registered to also accommodate trafficking in persons. Unfortunately, you never know where you pick up the persons that are trafficked. Can be in Beaufort West, it can be in Caledon, it can be in the city of Cape Town. And you have to have shelters all over to put them further from where they were found, and where people can look for them and so on. So we stay away from saying we have a shelter in Beaufort West, for instance. And I know the standing committee often asks us, where is the shelters? We don't want to tell you because then it becomes unsafe for the people within the shelters. It's just the next slide on services provided by shelters. First of all, safe accommodation, a place to sleep, and they can bring their children with them. Skills development, where we empower them. reintegration and aftercare is we don't leave you when you have to reintegrate, and we look after you. We refer you to a social worker that can still support you, and then of course we ongoing therapeutic support, because every life stage, and that's not for the whole family. It's not only for the woman. You know, a girl that have been sexually assaulted as a child, reaching puberty, immediately triggered again. Getting married, immediately triggered again. So that's what's happening. In short, I want to say that we recently have launched 11 GBV ambassador programs, and we have 320 people from various communities, our first line of pickup and support for a victim. And we are very proud of that, because that's in the streets of the province. And then, of course, I can escalate and so on as needed, that person. Thank you very much. This was just in short what we are doing. And thank you for the support of everybody.
Rihanna Goosen and colleagues from the Department of Social Development, thank you for your inspiring and important work. We are now going to, Dr. Harry Malila will come just now from the Department of the Premier. In the meanwhile, we're going to shift and just move around our program a little bit. And we're going to go to the Institute for African Alternatives. And we have with us today Nazima Mohammed and Rachel Nirongo. And they're going to talk to us about the Decode program. Do you want the thingamajig? Yes.
Anyone want this?
Thank you. You can put it here. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Honorable members, members of civil society. It's an honor to be here and to participate in this colloquium today. So as Benedetta has indicated, we from the Institute for African Alternatives, and we're going to speak to the specific issues around the Decode project, which is a research project that was started just before Ben Turak, who was a member of the National Legislature, passed away. So we have embarked on a small research program, which was funded by the Embassy of the Netherlands, and it includes more than the two of us. And I must acknowledge my other colleagues as Moira Levy and Bruce Kadali. So Decode, what does it stand for? Decode, spelled out, is in defense of our constitutional democracy. So Decode was conceptualized in the aftermath of the Zondo Commission as a civil society response to the threats state capture posed to our democracy. The Zondo Commission made it clear that state capture was not only about corruption in the executive or private sector, it was equally about Parliament's failure to exercise meaningful oversight. The project carries forward, as I had said, the work begun by Ben Turak, the founder of the Institute for African Alternatives, who devoted his later years to strengthening Parliament's role in upholding democracy and ensuring that civil society remained a vigilant partner in governance. So Decode's earlier workshops before this project that we're going to discuss this morning was related to the uneven response to the Zondo's Commission's recommendations. And we looked at the initiatives describing as supporting both Parliament and civil society in taking forward the findings of the Commission. So it was our aim was to look at research, monitoring, and advocacy to strengthen accountability. So at its core, Decode is built on the conviction that public participation is the foundation of accountability and central to our democracy. By amplifying the voices of civil society and citizens, Decode seeks to strengthen Parliament's resilience against capture, indifference, or neglect, and to deepen the democratic promise of our Constitution. So our current research focus, with a small grant from the Netherlands Embassy, we conducted an in-depth qualitative study designed to be a snapshot of public participation. And we examined public participation through interviews with exiting parliamentarians from the previous parliament, and the segment of civil society. That is, we looked at the perspectives of gender equity and climate change organizations. The findings from exiting parliamentarians were that there has been a shift in Parliament's engagement with civil society over time. In the first democratic Parliament, engagement was rigorous and prioritized. In more recent years, participation has weakened, with engagement often treated as a formality rather than as a central part of Parliament's work. So the findings from civil society's role and tensions, the research highlighted that the nature of the relationship between civil society, government, and Parliament at times was harmonious, and that was appreciated, and at times there was strong opposition between the two. And the organizations that we interviewed felt that this was healthy. They felt that this was really, really important for our democracy, to have this tension between government and civil society. But they said, in order to maintain a healthy tension, we must acknowledge and support civil society. Because if you repress civil society, there's no space for an intervention and for accountability. And so the request was that there must be a reduction of the barriers that impact public participation in Parliament. So the general view was that civil society organizations remain essential because they uphold accountability, connect governance to grassroots realities, and they amplify the voices of communities. In terms of our findings on gender equity organizations, the gender equity organizations interviewed include the Commission for Gender Equality, Gender Links, and Sonke Gender Justice. They reflected on their direct experiences in engaging with the national legislature. They noted that Parliament is still engaging, but very unevenly. They welcome the attempts by parliamentarians to reach out, because some parliamentarians do, and they value the opportunities that exist, but stress that there's need for more consistent, structured engagement rather than ad hoc hearings. They said that coordination must be systemic. Weak alignment is not only a parliamentary problem, but a challenge across the system of governance as a whole, including the executive and oversight institutions. This undermines the integration of gender perspectives and results in fragmented outcomes. It was really interesting to hear how that is being addressed in the province, and really well done on that. They said that implementation remains a problem. Participation rarely translates into meaningful follow-up policy change. And this is a major criticism, that implementation is a big challenge. And monitoring and evaluation systems require much more rigor. Budget provision is inadequate. And we've seen it with the first plan, the resolution 13, and now it's gone out of my head, 1355. Without proper resourcing, Parliament and civil society cannot give sustained effect to gender equity commitments. And as I said, this mirrors the critiques of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, when underfunding undermines the realization of well-intended plans. GBV is a national disaster. We must keep saying that. It is a huge problem for our country. We are at war with women, and we are at war with children. Organizations acknowledge the establishment of the National Council on GBV and Femicide as a positive step, but express concern that its processes have been slow. It's taken years and years, and they've actually felt like it's not worth engaging on anymore. That's the feeling we got. They're saying without proper funding and strong community level engagement, including education and prevention, the council risks becoming another symbolic gesture rather than a vehicle for change. So these findings matter for our discussions today because UN Security Council Resolution 1325 is about meaningful inclusion and participation, about public participation. If South Africa's action plan is to be credible, it must take into account broader forces that shape peace and security. And here, poverty and inequality is critical. You can't speak about peace without speaking about those major challenges. In particular, the impact of climate change must be considered. Climate change drives displacement, inequality, and insecurity, and it intersects directly with the women, peace, and security agenda. And I will now hand over to Rachel, my colleague, who will share her insights from interviews with climate organizations and their engagement with Parliament. Thank you.
It's a very busy podium, yeah? Thank you, Nazima.
Good morning to Honorable Speaker, all the honorable members and members of civil society. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to reflect on some of the thoughts from civil society. So as we carried out the Decode project, I was specifically looking at climate change organizations and organizations that are dealing with climate change issues and how they've been interacting with Parliament. So I will say that the discussion was based on the interactions with National Parliament, but I do think it's still important for Provincial Parliament to hear these thoughts. So the first thing that I would like to speak about is the role of civil society. And civil society is obviously not only willing, but they're fully capable of self-organizing. I think they've proven that time and time again. However, it's important to note that not all organizations have the same level of access. So for instance, in Cape Town, we have a lot of organizations that deal with climate change issues, but the communities that they're also serving to protect and to give a voice to are far from Cape Town. If we have national parliament in Cape Town, they don't have access to it as easily as these organizations do. So it's important for provincial parliaments such as Western Cape Provincial Parliament to be accessible to these communities so that they can have their voices heard. And civil society has shown time and time again that they're willing to bring people together. They're willing to organize their own workshops, to create spaces to educate activists and young people on how to address Parliament. This is not new to civil society, but more often than not, they're still met by a lot of roadblocks. So we need to work together with civil society and the young people that are trying to make a change. Secondly, I'd like to also just touch on other frustrations that they raised. So one of the main concerns that they raised is they often are also met with blocks of seeing that what's important to Parliament is not necessarily what's of national or public interest, but what is important to the party policies. So one of the issues that they shared is that right now, climate change is being heard more in National Parliament. There are more doors that are opening to for National Parliament to listen to them. But that's also obviously now we're seeing a change in government. We've seen the GNU come into effect. However, before the doors, were closed. So for national institutions such as Parliament, party politics shouldn't come into play. It should be what is serving the interests of the people, and there shouldn't be a barrier. And that is something that they raise quite often in the discussions, that they're happy that doors are opening, but it shouldn't have been what that led to this doors opening. And of course, like I said, precisely, I said in the beginning that it's something that was raised about national parliament, but I think provincial parliament is very important. And I quote the honorable speaker that he spoke this morning. He said that the plan is to not do a parliament without other people. And I think that's very important for us to remember consistently, that Parliament is here to serve the people and the interests of the people. And young people and the young people in the organizations have a lot of energy. and they have a lot of vigor and they want to do a lot of work. And it's important for the honorable members that are sitting in the parliament to recognize this, but also to give the young people space where they're not using their energy trying to overcome hurdles, but they're using their energy to have meaningful conversations that lead to change. And finally, I would like to just bring forward some recommendations that were raised in the conversations that we had with civil society. And so, first of all, civil society does want to see more partnership with Parliament. They want to see more engagement. They recognize that, change happens through policy, change happens through Parliament. So they're not shying away from that. What they're saying is we want to be able to have a space where we can raise our voice, and when we share our ideas, they're heard and they're actually taken forward. So that's the first thing that they wanted to speak about. And secondly, they also want Parliament to take initiative in actually helping young people and civil society have not just have a platform, but have the tools that they need to actually address Parliament. So it's important. Yes, civil society can do it, but there's resources that Parliament and national institutions have that can actually help in this in a much better way. So that's all I would like to say. But in conclusion, I would just like to emphasize again that for civil society, they want to build a relationship with Parliament, national and provincial parliaments. They want a relationship that is accountable. They want a relationship that is transparent, and they want a relationship that is centered on the people and the interests of the people. Thank you.
Next generation. Thank you so much, Rachel and Nazima. And we are now moving to the leader of the opposition in the provincial government, Honorable Khalid Sayed, who is very active on social media, by the way. All yours, sir.
And following some of the work. But thank you very much. Firstly, my greetings to the former President of the Republic of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe, if he's still online. Honorable Speaker of our Western Cape Provincial Legislature, Dalen Mitchell, and the Deputy Speaker, Regan Allen, who are champions not only of this initiative, but of every initiative in this House where the rights not only of women, but of the vulnerable in society are champions. So we thank you for that. Honorable members who are present, my colleagues, distinguished guests, colleagues, and partners from the Institute for African Alternatives, a institution whom I must say I have fond memories of the former director, late Professor Ben Turok. It was in my student days when I was at the University of Cape Town, the SASCO and ANC Youth League activists, that were amongst that generation of students that had the honor of being mentored by Comrade Ben. His PCO, his constituency office, was in Observatory. So we would walk across, or he would come across to the university, and often challenge us to think outside of the box, even outside of our party political affiliation, while he was an ANC public representative. It's an honor to address this important colloquium on the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was read out earlier, which is a landmark commitment to recognizing and advancing the role of women in peace, security, and conflict resolution. The valuable inputs which have been made thus far by all the speakers, I'm confident that those inputs will most certainly shape our oversight in this legislature. Our Speaker and Deputy Speaker are here. Chairpersons of committees are also here. Adopted 25 years ago, Resolution 1325 broke new ground by affirming that women are not only victims of violence in times of conflict, but critical agents of change, leadership, and peace building. It called on all nations to ensure women's representation at every level of decision making, to protect women and girls from violence, and to embed gender perspectives in policies of security and justice. But for us here in the Western Cape, the concept of peace and security is not limited to conflicts abroad. And while the former president and former deputy mentioned conflicts abroad, it's very important, but it's not only limited to conflicts abroad. It is deeply relevant in our communities, where gangsterism, organized crime, and gender-based violence create daily conditions of fear and instability. These challenges, and especially gender-based violence and femicide, have rightly been called a second pandemic in our country. But we need to go beyond calling these things pandemics and actually move towards action. And that's the role of us as legislators. We are not part of government. We are not members of governance, Speaker. Sometimes we forget that when we defend our political parties. We are there to hold government accountable and be the voice of women and the voice of society in that regard. For many women in working class neighborhoods and informal settlements and rural areas of the Western Cape, the struggle for safety and dignity is constant. The message of Resolution 1325 is that security is not simply the absence of violence, but the creation of an environment where every woman and girl can live, work, and move freely without fear. To realize this vision, we need action at every level. We need representation, yes. Women must not only have seats at the table, and I will say, as the leader of the official opposition, 5 out of the 8 MPLs in our caucus are women. My colleague, the chief whip, is a woman. But women need to be empowered as decision makers. In this legislature and across our democratic institutions, we have a responsibility to create space for women's leadership and to value the expertise that women bring to policy and governance. The work around, and I must say, the work around the establishment of the Western Cape Children's Commissioner, or the office of the commissioner, which is already in the constitution, but giving that expression in the 6th administration, was driven by women across the party political spectrum. There was a lot of lobbying that took place. It happened. And now we have another commissioner that has just been appointed. We need community engagement as well. Across the province, women are already leading. Here is a case in point as organizers, educators, and protectors in communities. Their voices must shape how we design and monitor safety and development strategies. Whilst great efforts have been made, that it was mentioned before by the chair of the session, while great efforts have been made to ensure that communities get to visit the legislature, attend some of the events, take part in some of the events, we really need to do much more work to ensure that women from communities we serve are actively shaping our oversight here inside of this legislature, including in our standing committees. Not only being invited to events, but when we have standing committees, women's voices must not be suppressed, even those who are not members. They must be able to inform and guide the kind of work that we do, and we must make an effort to ensure that they are participating. And we must build, and so that's very, very important. We need oversight and support. We've spoken to oversight. Oversight is not only about criticism. While criticism is crucial, criticism of government is important. And the work that has been done here in the legislature, including by the opposition around sexual harassment claims in senior government spheres, is a case in point. While the details may be able to be debated, the principle of raising these matters was important. But beyond the issue of criticism, oversight is about ensuring that promises translate into services. From safe shelters and psychosocial support to youth programs and economic empowerment initiatives. These interventions help break cycles of violence and vulnerability. And we must build partnerships Local peace and security cannot be achieved by the provincial government alone, by local government alone, by national government alone. Partnerships with community-based organizations, faith groups, and grassroots movements are vital to building resilience and creating safe, inclusive spaces. While we must be robust in holding government accountable, and we will differ politically in that regard, the discourse of our oversight, the manner in which we do oversight and hold government accountable and debate one another, must promote a culture of building meaningful partnerships across society. If society sees it as political parties and APLs, we are engaging in a manner that inhibits the building of meaningful partnerships. Society will not build meaningful partnerships. We will not be able to lead the way in building meaningful partnerships. We must lead by example. We must desist as members of this provincial parliament and politicians as a whole from breaking society by reinforcing patriarchy when we debate and when we differ politically. The use of jokes and jibes, heckling is good. But when we are reinforcing a culture of patriarchy and sexism when doing so, that becomes a major problem. Our partnership with the Institute for African Alternatives provides a valuable opportunity for us to lead by example. As the first provincial legislature to collaborate on this work, we have a chance to set a standard, to translate international commitments into practical, community-driven actions that make a tangible difference. If Resolution 1325 is to have meaning in the Western Cape, it must speak to the streets of Khayelitsha, Delft, Nyanga, Hanover Park, and the rural parts of our province, where women and children face daily threats to their safety, and to the classrooms, workplaces, and homes, where security and opportunity remain unequal. The words of the brave veteran activist in our struggle for democracy and for a just South Africa, Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, still resonate where she said, "You strike a woman, you strike a rock." This is not only a rallying cry against injustice, but a reminder that women are the foundation of resilient families, communities, and nations. Our task collectively is thus to ensure that the commitments that we make here today result in real change, safer places, better opportunities, stronger support systems for women and girls in every community. As we mark the 25th anniversary of Resolution 1325, let us recommit ourselves to its vision, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a call to sustained action. There is no space without safety. There is no safety without gender justice. And there can be no true justice until women are fully empowered as equal partners in building a safer, more inclusive future for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Khalid Sayed, Leader of the Official Opposition. We are now going to go to Dr. Harry Malila, who is from the Department of the Premier. I also follow the Premier on social media and a great many others, by the way. We have a beautiful multi-party democracy. And that podium is getting more work than any public servant ever.
There it is. Good morning to everyone, and also good morning to the Secretary of Parliament. Also, I want to acknowledge the Deputy Speaker, also the Speaker, and every member of Parliament in this House at the moment. And then obviously from our side as government, the Institute for African Alternatives, and every community person, that's actually represented here. I mean, from where I'm sitting, it is clear that you're representing a lot of people out there. And I mean, my job here today is to talk about the initiatives that we do as a Western Cape government. And then obviously from our side as government, the Institute for African Alternatives, and every community person, that's actually represented here. I mean, from where I'm sitting, it is clear that you're representing a lot of people out there. And I mean, my job here today is to talk about the initiatives that we do as a Western Cape government. And I mean, listening to our member side here, I mean, there's a lot of activities that we're doing, particularly not only in the month of August every year, but we are doing this sort of in all our activities in government. My name is Harry Malira. I'm the Director General in Western Cape Government. And as I've indicated, we have cabinet sitting at the moment, but I mean, this opportunity is a massive opportunity to speak about what we're doing in government. Obviously, framing resolution 1325 in the Western Cape context, it's important, that the resolution calls for full participation in peace building, protection in conflict, and prevention of gender-based violence. While South Africa is not at conventional war. I mean, some of us may say that, or some of us may even say that we are at war. Many communities face daily violence, instability, and exclusion. For women and girls in particular, this means living in fear, navigating trauma, and being denied opportunities to lead and thrive. This resolution, although it was passed 25 years ago, and I mean, there are many things that we're celebrating in South Africa, is still highly relevant to our collective response to GBV, gangsterism, and crime in the province. If one look at crime and gangsterism, particularly on women and girls in the province, gangsterism and organized crime are deeply entrenched in parts of our province. I mean, this is a matter that we are trying to address, and I'll speak about it just now. Women are disproportionately affected by crime through gender-based violence and female extortion and domestic violence. Women are often caught in the crossfire of gang violence, exposed to physical danger, emotional trauma, and the breakdown of households and community safety. Girl children are recruited into gangs. They are exposed to drugs and denied safe spaces in our province. These are systematic challenges with generational impacts. And for those of you, that have grown up in this province, for those of you that have grown up in particular areas in this part of the Cape, can actually testify that we are dealing with some generational impacts. From a youth empowerment perspective, violence perspective, and also gangsterism, a lack of opportunity, we found, and we've expressed that in our provincial strategic plan, is a root cause of youth involvement in violence and gangsterism. In the absence of education, employment, and safe spaces, gangs offer identity, income, and influence. And these are all the negative things, that gangs are offering to our youth, and particularly in this case also to some of our girl children. Young people often see no viable alternative. But in this government, we want to create an opportunity. We want to create alternatives to gangsterism. We want to create alternatives to crime as well as violence. Because we believe gangsterism and violence are symptoms of exclusion. The Western Cape government responds through these initiatives, looking at our provincial strategic plan and particularly our growth for job strategy to restore agency, dignity, and opportunities. And these strategies aim to build viable, visible alternatives to gangsterism and violence, and we will gladly provide the necessary documentation, to this team. If I look at our plans for basically the next 5 years to deal, with the issue of violence and gangsterism, and particularly addressing the issues of women and our girl child, our PSP places safety, dignity, and opportunity at the heart of development, and we focus on 4 integrated impacts. Firstly, it starts at home. So we're focusing on thriving households. We want to create a safe, stable environment that supports well-being and growth. Then from the house, it moves into communities. And what we're looking at is creating cohesive communities that are inclusive, that are resilient, and that we actually provide spaces for people to thrive. And obviously, we want to create spaces for strong leadership. We also want to empower youth. So we want to create agency. We want to make sure that youth are properly educated, and we want to support them to lead and also to be innovative. And then lastly, we want to create inclusive growth. We believe that we don't just want to grow the economy, but we want to grow the economy and enable the economy to create the necessary growth. But that growth must be inclusive, and it must include investment, particularly investment in infrastructure, and it must also create opportunity. If we look at our safety priority, our PSP wants to focus on some key safety interventions. We start with violence prevention. If you look at our safety plan, it basically sits on 2 pillars, violence prevention and then also law enforcement. But we believe we can't just look at law enforcement because that is a reactive step, by government. So we want to focus on violence prevention, early childhood support, trauma care, and family strengthening. And then from an infrastructure perspective, obviously, to create safe infrastructure spaces, we want to make sure that we've got well-lit streets, parks, and community-led safety initiatives, and then a responsive law enforcement agency, trusted policing, survivor support, and also data-driven justice. My pre-final point is on growth for jobs. We believe that if you cannot create all of this if we don't grow the economy. So our growth for job strategy, which is our number one priority in this government, because we're focusing on growing the economy and an economy that's inclusive and also allowing people to take up those jobs. Our growth for job strategy provides targeted economic interventions that create opportunities for youth. The focus is to improve access to employability and economic opportunities. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that people have access to the tools, the ability and the agency to work and to take up economic opportunities. And some of the key outcomes that we're working on in the next 5 years is to make sure that we expand access to workplace skills and productive training. We want to support entrepreneurs and small micro enterprises. And obviously a lot of this is to do, with women, improve sustainability of informal and formal businesses, and also enhance resilience for just transition to low carbon economy. So in concluding, Chair, the Western Cape government is firmly committed to build a safer, more inclusive province. Our response to crime, violence, and gender-based violence is rooted in strengthening households and community. We want to create real alternatives for youth and empowering women and girls. We will support families and communities through integrated preventative intervention. We will expand access to education, skills, and economic opportunity so that youth can choose future beyond violence. We want to engage men as active partners in promoting safety and challenging harmful norms. And we want to empower women and girls to lead in their communities and institutions and to drive sustainable peace. But in conclusion, we cannot do this on our own. As a Western Cape government, we want to build a government that people trust. We want to build a government that is entrenched with values, but we cannot do this alone. And we want you as the community, as active society, to actually support us. But we will also be guided by Resolution 1325, and that will guide our efforts. But we believe that together we are building a province where safety, dignity, and opportunity, particularly for women and for youth, are shared by all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malila, for an inspiring input. And we are glad that the province is being run by you. And it's a privilege to meet you, sir. We are shifting the program slightly with your indulgence. We're going to have all the presentations now and then have group discussion. It's a better flow that way. And we in the Western Cape, we have two oceans. We kind of flow. So we're now going to have a man with the interesting title of being a chief whip, Honorable Gillian Bosman, dear friend and colleague.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I made it back just in time. I haven't had this podium in a long time. If you've ever watched a debate, it's always interesting to watch the face of the speaker when members ask for the podium, because we only have one, so you have to carry it around the house. And in terms of parliamentary rules, you can't pass it across the floor once the mace is in the house. But Program Director, thank you very much for allowing us an opportunity to engage. And I greet you, as well as former President Motlanthe, the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker, and my colleagues, and all of civil society present as well, our key stakeholders. It's certainly an honor to speak on behalf of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament in my capacity as Chief Whip of the Legislature. For us, this resolution is once again another opportunity to not just reaffirm our commitment to public participation and to oversight, but also to reflect on how we do that. The Resolution 1325 challenges all of us, and not just those in our national government, in our national parliament, but also those in legislatures at a provincial level and local levels, specifically at local authority level, to ensure that women are central to peace, central to security, and central to the development agenda. In our provincial parliament, we understand oversight not simply as an administrative task, but as a democratic responsibility to give substance to the rights enshrined in our constitution, as well as our global commitments, such as Resolution 1325. And I'm proud to say that this Parliament has many global partnerships to make sure that we extend our oversight role and we also bring the perspectives as a provincial legislator and the people of the Western Cape to those global spaces. As a parliament and as someone who is responsible for largely overseeing the committee work of parliament, our committees scrutinize how departments in this government plan and budget for gender equality. We ask whether our safety programs that the DG just spoke about are addressing the realities of gender-based violence in our communities. We track how economic development initiatives empower, specifically women and youth, because we know those are the peace builders in our society. We interrogate whether our disaster management response and our climate resilience response, which are key drivers of conflict and risk going forward, are inclusive of women's leadership and their knowledge. And I'm very proud to say that when you look at the officials working in this government and working in municipalities across this province, and when you look at the officials working in this parliament, we are certainly well led by women. Oversight for us goes beyond what happens in this chamber. Through our constituency work, through site visits, members of this parliament is able to bring the voices of young women, of children through our engagements with the Western Cape Commissioner for Children. I must add, the only Commissioner for Children in the Republic of South Africa. We're able to bring those voices into this parliament and into the conversations around lawmaking. And I'm very proud to say that under the leadership of our Speaker, we've taken a specific step in making sure that we include more rural voices, because very often people think the Western Cape starts here and it ends at the Huguenot Tunnel, which it doesn't. And we spend a large bulk of our time engaging rural communities, and especially communities who do not readily have access to the services that both this parliament provides and also the government. Why we do this is because it really ensures that as a parliament, that our debates are informed what happens in our communities and what happens in society at large. We cannot just echo statistics in this chamber. We have to actually bring people's lived experiences. And Honorable Mbombo and I were at a march on Saturday morning against gender-based violence. And we were reminded that the majority of the audience commemorating the life of Uyinene Mkhatana were young boys from the Langa Youth Men's Forum. And it was refreshing to see that young people, and especially young men, were also showing up for women, because we cannot always expect women to do it themselves. So from our perspective, in conclusion, our oversight role is twofold. It's accountability, and that means ensuring that every rand spent by this government moves us closer to safety, dignity, and the equal participation, specifically of women, and advocacy, because we have to be able to use the platform that Parliament presents to keep gender, peace, and security issues high on the public and the political agenda. So, colleagues, in conclusion again, Resolution 1325 is as much a global framework, but we also have to look at how do we internalize it in our everyday operations. As members of Parliament who are responsible for oversight and members who are responsible to be the connection between our communities, we really have to look at how do we move beyond just sort of meeting our responsibilities, but that we actually also meaningfully engage. And I'm very proud to say that our partnerships with civil society and with communities are continually strengthened. And I'm so grateful to see familiar faces here and also new faces. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Honourable Gillian Bosman. And how can the arts contribute to peacemaking in our community? It's a very critical, and arts education for peace. How we can invest in that and promote that is of particular interest to Honourable Bosman and I. We are now we have two further presentations from the Provincial Parliament. We're going to go to Benedicta van Minnen, who is the chair of the Standing Committee on Police Oversight and Communities. Oh, it's Bernadette, my namesake. My namesake Bernadette, whom I'm delighted to have met earlier, is the chair, is speaking from the Committee on Police Oversight and Community Safety. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And I must say it is a very auspicious day when I actually meet somebody who has a name that is a version of mine, because it's very, very rare indeed. So, yes, it certainly is nice. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today we gather here in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament to reflect on realizing the vision of the United Nations National Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. In particular, I rise to draw attention to the oversight perspective. Have we made much progress, or do we still face enormous challenges in moving this resolution forward? And importantly, how do we as members of this Parliament leverage our constitutional oversight role to ensure that progress is not only promised, but delivered upon? Throughout history, while it is generally speaking, men who fight and participate in war, in violence and in conflict, we must recognize that conflict has had a particularly devastating impact on women and children. From displacement and destruction of homes to violence, rape, and genocide, it is indeed women who often bear the brunt of conflict's consequences, whilst playing the least role in actually causing such conflict. And within our own context, South Africa has one of the highest violence and crime rates outside of countries actually at war. Over the past 25 years, Resolution 1325 has inspired 105 countries to adopt national action plans, over 30 of which are in Africa. And of that 30, many have, in fact, experienced violent conflict and war. It is strengthening global recognition that peace processes cannot succeed when half of society is excluded. Where women participate meaningfully, peace agreements are more likely to be reached and sustained. Civil society, particularly women's organizations, have been at the forefront of translating 1325's principles into action on the ground. Yet despite these gains, our journey is far from complete. Women remain underrepresented at peace negotiations, despite the fact that it is often women in communities who drive these peace initiatives. In the Western Cape, it's often women, particularly mothers, who have lost children to gang violence, who have stepped forward to mediate between gangs, such as organizations such as Mothers Against Crime. Church-based women's groups and interfaith leaders in Cape Town have often been instrumental in promoting peace building, and many women clergy organize vigils and peace marches, such as those held in Mannenberg and Hanover Park. However, this work is often, despite the importance of the role, simply not seen or simply not appreciated. Conflict-related sexual violence continues with impunity, and South Africa has extremely high rape statistics, and GBV continues to be a problem. This is not something that can merely be arrested away. It requires a whole of society approach and a change in gender role modeling and interpersonal skills. And that begins with parenting, with communities, and a functional society based on values such as empathy and mutual respect. In too many national contexts, national action plans exist on paper, but lack financing, lack accountability, and meaningful political will. And this is where the role of parliamentary oversight becomes critical. Oversight is not a passive function. It is something that legislators need to exercise actively and continuously. It's the instrument through which we can demand accountability, ensure resources are allocated, and measure whether commitments are actually being met. To fulfill the promise of Resolution 1325, we must act decisively. And in this regard, legislatures have a unique role to play with using political leadership and accountability to require regular reporting on the implementation of this resolution, and to hold departments accountable through oversight committees and debates in the House. Leveraging oversight powers to ensure budgets are aligned to programs that empower women. All peace talks, ceasefire monitoring, and reconstruction processes should include women at decision-making levels. The criminal justice system has prioritized justice for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, ensuring prosecution of perpetrators and reparations for victims. We must prioritize partnerships across sectors by implementing collaboration. Governments, civil society, the private sector, and international organizations all have a role to play. An example of this in the Western Cape government is the deployment of various additional safety measures across neighbourhoods, including neighbourhood watches, which are mainly made up of women. In my constituency, I can particularly think of Auntie Doreen, who's now, she must be about 85, and Auntie Ellen, who's not even 5 foot tall. But it is these women who night after night patrol the area, know everyone in the communities, and who drive safety in their spaces. There's nothing we love more than being given a clipboard and being told to go knock on everyone's front doors, because they really know who everybody is. They know who the children are who are in conflict with the law. They know what the social networks are. That's an incredibly important resource, and we need to be leveraging that. It's women like this who are actively working to safeguard their respective communities. What helps is that women like this are known to their communities and they have social currency. They're embedded in their communities, are familiar with gangsters operating in the area, and are respected to a larger degree by the role players who tend to have no respect for traditional policing figures. Another example that has already been mentioned is the Western Cape's Commissioner for Children, the only such commissioner in the Republic. The work of this office and the Commissioner looks to investigate and report on the situations faced by children in the province and makes recommendations to the provincial government on how to remedy many of the problems faced by children. Again, it is an initiative that really needs to be worked on and expanded because it really brings enormous social value. Another important initiative being driven in the Western Cape should be the devolution of policing powers to be closer to the communities that they serve, to better understand and work with these communities, and to ensure more prosecutions and consequences for perpetrators of crime. Currently, less than 8% of arrests for illegal firearms in Cape Town result in convictions. That means that over 90% of those arrests, nothing happens. They simply go back into society and there are no consequences. Half of these arrests never reach court. Now that's a very, very serious problem. However, if devolution were to allow for local police to be granted investigative powers, it would help enormously in helping prosecute serious crimes such as gang-related violence, firearm charges, drug trafficking, assault, robbery, and domestic violence. It is these kinds of interventions that legislators should support and strengthen, especially when considering the role of women. By ensuring that budgets align with these initiatives, we can help them remain objective and effective. Resolution 1325 was a promise that women should no longer be sidelined in peace and security. But a promise is only as good as the action that follows it. Our oversight role is the bridge between commitment and reality. As role players, we must recommit ourselves to exercising this role with diligence and courage, tracking progress, exposing failures, and ensuring that women's voices are not symbolic but decisive in shaping peace and security. As we move forward, let us remember there can be no lasting peace without women's full and equal participation. Implementing Resolution 1325 is not optional. It is essential for justice, for stability, and for humanity itself. I thank you.
And we thank you, Honourable Namesake. Thank you very much. We are now going to go to Madam Wendy Kaiser-Philander, who is the chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. It's really lovely for us to get to know Provincial Parliament. We only know National Parliament, so now it's a privilege for us to see you guys in action. Thank you very much.
Baie dankie, voorsitter. Ek dink nie ons het al Afrikaans gehoor vandag nie. So laat my toe om u te groet in my ma se taal vanoggend. Former President Motlanthe, honourable members, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, when we speak of women, peace and security, we are not engaging in theory. We are speaking about the lived realities of women and girls in our society, who often carry the heaviest burden of conflict, poverty, crime, and social instability. And I think one of the speakers earlier on made mention of a war. And I think we can rightfully say that it is a war. Peace and security cannot be sustained without the full participation and protection of women. But participation and protection do not materialize from signatures on documents. They are realized through oversight, accountability, and implementation. As South African women, we have this urgency. This urgency is now to be the priority of peace and the security agenda, whereby policy responses such as the establishment of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, alongside the National Strategic Plan, should be aimed at tackling systemic drivers of violence that improves coordination and building safer communities. But instead, structural barriers such as weak enforcement, and our colleague extensively spoke about that, social norms and underfunded justice mechanisms continue to hinder our security and peace, making accountability and stronger intersectoral action essential. Based on the latest Stats SA Victim of Crime report, and some male this morning had the audacity to say that women are relatively safe. And how ignorant is that? That is a direct insult to the lived realities of millions of women across this country, and that is painful. I mean, how dare anyone trivialize the crisis that we are in when a woman in this country is raped every few minutes, when femicide rates are among the highest in the world, and when survivors are routinely failed by an under-resourced justice system. Relatively safe is definitely not safe. No one can dare suggest that women are safe, and it is not a perception issue. It is the brutal reality that demands honesty, accountability, and urgent action. And as the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Social Development in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, I carry the responsibility of ensuring that policies and programs are designed to protect women and children that can relate into lived realities. And we must be very clear on the mandate. And that is to monitor the work of the Department of Social Development and other stakeholders to make sure that we interrogate the budgets, to have that necessary public engagements and hearings, and we heard earlier on the importance thereof, and to ensure that vulnerable groups, especially women and children, are not left behind. We know the stats. Gender-based violence remains pervasive. Child abuse cases seldom lead to convictions, and women are often excluded from decision-making platforms where their input could prevent harm and strengthen communities. And this is not acceptable. Our oversight reports and dialogues have highlighted a truth that echoes the call of 1325. Security is not only the absence of conflict, it is the presence of justice, inclusion, and protection. For us in the Western Cape, this means ensuring that gender-based violence services are funded, they should be accessible, and they should be trauma-informed. Monitoring the rollout of social workers in schools, clinics, and communities, because these are the frontline defenders of peace and social stability. Demanding gender-responsive budgeting so that every rand allocated to social development works to protect our women and our children. Tracking the implementation of interdepartmental coordination between social development, health, education, the South African Police Service, and justice, because women's safety cannot be compartmentalized. The Standing Committee has already hosted dialogues on child protection and community safety. And these engagements remind us that oversight is not passive. It is active. We need to participate, and it is rooted in the voices of survivors, of activists, and frontline workers. And this is indeed the spirit of Resolution 1325. Building peace by amplifying voices of women and our communities at large, at every level. Madam Chair of the session, let me be clear that accountability is not punishment. Accountability is justice. When a survivor of violence waits months for a court date, someone must answer. When funds meant for women's protection are misused, consequences must follow. And when women are excluded from peace-building spaces, and we lose the chance of sustainable peace, that should be addressed. Our committee has recommitted itself to pushing for systemic reform, using every oversight tool available to ensure that policies do not remain paper shields. And we must not ignore the opportunities of our time. Digital platforms can strengthen the women, peace and security agenda. Real-time reporting channels for gender-based violence, data-driven mapping of communities that are most at risk, and I believe that the Department of Social Development did allude to that. E-learning platforms to equip social workers, peace builders, and community leaders with the tools that will enable them to intervene. Honorable colleagues, Resolution 1325 is not only an international commitment, it is a provincial and a national obligation. The Western Cape Provincial Parliament, through its standing committees, has a duty to ensure that our province's policies, budgets, and programs uphold the rights of women and children as central to peace and to security. And history will not judge us by the number of frameworks we have signed off. It will judge us by the women we protected, by the children that we have safeguarded, and by the communities that we have rebuilt. So let this be the term in which we move from oversight to real impact, from commitments to actual change, from promises to protection. And the women of our province are watching. And more importantly, they are waiting. So let us not fail them. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Honourable Wendy Kaiser-Flander, thank you for that inspiring input. We appreciate it. To the honourable speakers, please would you send your presentations or have your office send your presentations to my new best friend, Sunal Fisher, who will then send it on to us. Thank you very much. The secretary is my old best friend, husband, but no discrimination. In the foyer, the beautiful people in this legislature have arranged with the Department of Culture, Art and Sport, one of my favorite spaces, a beautiful art exhibition. And we have Bongiwe Swatboy from DCAS to tell us what the exhibition is about, and so we can admire and revel in that, after which we'll have group discussion if that it meets with your approval. So Bongiwe Swatboy, welcome to our meeting. Do you want the podium?
Sit here and find you.
This artistic person doesn't want the podium. Very good. Please speak.
This was unplanned, so we're putting Bongi on the spot
Under the
here.
spot, yes.
But she's artistic, so it's go with the flow.
Good morning, everyone. The artworks or the exhibition that is in the foyer, it's called Protect Her Future. So I chose that significant title for the exhibition based on the information that I was presented, that it's about women, peace, security. And so I decided, how do I bring honor to this? And I did that through the different artworks that you find in the exhibition space. So the exhibition itself, it draws from the collection of museum services featuring significant works that speaks to women's lives, struggles across generation. So some of the works that you'll find there is from Tyrone Apollos, which is called Mother and Child, which captures the intimacy and protective strength of motherhood during apartheid period, while his piece, The Meeting, reminds us of collective struggle and the voices of women in public resistance. You also find some of the lino cards, which is the black and white works, which is from Billy Mandidi. And the one that I selected there was Liberty, which is to honor, fight, emancipation, freedom. And the other one is His Mother and Twins, which reflects to the dual burdens of care, survival that you find through women. The other artwork that you find, which is one of the colorful ones when you enter from the other side, which is from Lynn Holly, which is called Mother Earth. That one calls forth women as healers, protectors of life, balancing grief, resilience. And I also have other work on the exhibition space, which is from Mawande Mtini, which is called Mother and Child, which emphasizes endurance in the face of systematic violence, showing both vulnerability and strength. So a central part of this exhibition, also when you enter from the other side, which is when we come through here, you'll find mostly the works of Sue Williamson, which is a series. It's called A Few South Africans. Here we encounter iconic figures such as Albertina Sisulu, Lillian Goyi, Charlotte McClage, Miriam Makeba, and all of these women are women who stood at the forefront of activism, education, cultural resistance. These portraits to me, and I'm hoping to you guys as well, guys, that these portraits are more than images. They are acts of remembrance, recognition of women who helped shape the democratic freedom we now inherit. Together, these works create a dialogue across time, connecting struggles against apartheid, colonialism, and today's battles against gender-based violence, inequality, and the pursuit of peace and justice. They remind us that protecting women's future is inseparable from protecting the future of our society. So thank you, and thank you also for inviting me to use your space.
Thank you, dear Bongiwe. And yes, these guys are very young, especially Honorable Gillian Bosman. But even the speaker and deputy speaker, it's very lovely to see such young people in leadership, because we need to renew our leadership and not only have veterans everywhere. With all respect to my delightful veteran friends. But now I wanted to acknowledge the participants who've come from all over and to thank you for joining us today. And we can now engage with the topics among us and with our legislature and the executives here as well. And so I just want to quickly acknowledge some of the people in the room. We have the Institute for African Alternatives, Moira Levy. She also edits the accredited journal New Agenda. And wave, Moira. She has gray hair in the back. There we go. And she has a very lovely and important publication, freshly printed for you. The ink is still drying. We have Barbara Russ from Atlantis, long-standing community activist. We have Kailicha filmmaker Pam Zukofa. And we have Jackie Thomas, who runs the Public Education Office at National Parliament. We're very privileged to have you. Next to her was sitting the brand new Commissioner for Gender Equality Advocate Sihan Samai, but she has dashed off for the moment, but we await her return. We have an incredible woman called Suraya Nair who does organizational development and all kinds of healing things. And then our colleagues from the IJR, Lindy Wekoza and her two colleagues. And then honored also to have the former Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Mam Nozizwe Madlala Routledge, and her lovely husband, who used to be one of my earlier mentors when I was a youngster, Jeremy Routledge. So, and all the others whom I might not know at the moment, but we'll get to know. Welcome, Commissioner Advocate Sihan Samai. And there is something in the comments that was said that this is the only problems with Children's Rights Commissioner. We need to make all the provinces have that or national. It's a very interesting thing there. So now we just acknowledged all of you have come. Sunal wants to say something.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to an indication that I'm liaising with the people who are joining us via MS Teams. They will alert me in the chat if they want to say something. I will schedule it and then give it to the Chair, and then they will manage the mic on the team side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunal. Honourable Speaker.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would also like to acknowledge that there is members and chairpersons of the various committees online. So I want to encourage the honourable members who is online, if you want to respond or make an input, please do so. And so now we'll facilitate that. There's also other chairpersons that didn't speak on the agenda today, but that's also present. So colleagues, please feel free to make your contribution if you so wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. We really appreciate that. Since we're only just beginning to get to know all of you, we aren't able to identify you. So thank you for identifying people. So we are now open for discussion around how we co-create women, peace and security, how we create cultures of peace, societies of peace and non-violence, and how we contribute to this national action plan as government, as legislators, as civil society, and how we own it and make it our own and put it in our daily lives. We will take comments from everyone here and online. Mam Nozizwe, please.
Thank you so much for inviting us to this landmark meeting. I want to call it a landmark meeting for us together in this way, in this room, coming from different positions of power. And I like to emphasize positions of power because I think wherever you are, you have power and agency. And I really want to honor that. I heard our former President Kgalema Motlanthe and our speaker from International Civil Society remind us of the role South Africa has played and continues to need to play in impacting global issues. And now today, particularly the issue we are discussing must come to the forefront. I'm so happy that the Provincial Parliament is engaging in this issue because I think former President Kgalema Motlanthe challenged us from looking at blueprints to really achieving impact. And this, for me, I think, is part of that process. It's really been lovely to hear from so many people today, all saying the same thing. But something stood out for me when I think Nazim spoke about gender-based violence as a disaster. I don't know if we'll reach a point where it will indeed be declared a national disaster, because even as you look at recent statistics, they show us that sexual violence is on the increase. And I think this does call for us to act as if we have a national disaster, which we do.
So are you suggesting we declare a state of disaster and allocate resources appropriately both nationally and provincially? Thank you, Ms. Naziza Madlala Ratledge, for that important intervention. We will take more questions and comments. Y'all aren't very talkative today. Yes, ma'am, please.
Good morning, everybody. Or is it? Yes, it's still morning.
Please introduce yourself, say your name and where you're from, and then.
Patsy Daniels from the Laratu Family Foundation from Manenberg. I'm sitting very conflicted here. The fact being that I've been part of, for the being trained and the implementation of the national WPS National Action Plan, having to implement it as well in my community. Like I say, I come from Manenberg, and I've already heard a lot of, issues coming out. So I can speak to all of the issues that has been raised here, in terms of successful stories. But I think we also need to really hamper on, what is happening on grassroots level, what is happening on the ground. And I'm glad somebody had mentioned, that we need to bring, the people's lived experiences into Parliament, because until we don't do that, we will have this junction in terms of what is really happening. And I think the passion for me is about, the women really, but also children more especially. Because if we say we're looking at parenting, we're looking at parents, we're looking at households, we're looking at how our children are being disadvantaged as we speak. Because violence has been so normalized, the way children are being treated, as little as the 2-year-old. Like yesterday, for example, the child is going to the shop with the mother. The child is swearing and it's being normalized. This child is swearing and it's not seen that, this child is actually being groomed. Sunday evening, I witnessed the father, shouting aggressively at a 3-year-old. And so my point of departure is, you want to intervene. And I come from that background. I come from a parenting background working in community development. And so the intervention for me is not a problem. It's not a challenge. It's when you take it a step further. If you take it to these officers, they're service providers in terms of service delivery intervention, and also the lack of, following through on cases. And we find a lot of cases, and I heard it this morning as well, a lot of these cases fall through the cracks, of not being seen to, where our children are at risk and very vulnerable. So we are actually, yes, we are at war with ourselves. And I think we need to acknowledge that, because it actually also came out in the National Convention, with the president, because it seemed like it was the state against the people, the citizens in that room, right, at UNISA. So I think for me, it's about how do we look at the turnover of staff, whether it's in South African police services, whether it's at, at local level, with, for example, child welfare, Cape Town child welfare, all of these entities, that it's actually supposed to be the service delivery and needs to meet the people where they are at. And I think that is where the disconnect is. And so if we say we want to, implement, because there are women, there are neighborhood watchers that are aware of this National Action Plan. I've workshopped them in Manenberg. I've made them aware of this, right? So for me, it's about how do we work together to look at that, because I think, yes, we're sitting on a policy level, legislation level. I just indicated to Siam Samai, I'm also one of, the human rights defenders from the Women's Legal Center, where we were trained during COVID 2019. I also indicated where we, and if Caroline Peters from the Colors Foundation was in this room, when people spoke about, the shelters, for example, and the women and the children that needs to be removed. And we are lobbying to say, let the perpetrator be removed and not the family be uprooted, because I think that's the crux of the matter, because now the whole family has to be uprooted. The children has to change schools and all of this. I'm just giving these examples. We're talking about, wanting to change society. I hear about, what the provincial government wants to do, in terms of the 4 strategies. Are we speaking about overcrowding? Are we speaking about issues of land dispossession? There are people are still crying, dying, not, reaching these issues. And so it's much, yes, and that is where women are, at the core and the crux of the matters. And for example, a place like Manenberg, gender-based violence is underreported because of the gang violence. and child abuse is underreported because of issues like gang violence. So I would plead to this house to look at, if we speak, we want to bring about change and we want to bring it on policy level. Because I sit on one hand, like, I don't want to speak policy. I don't want to, become academic, because I am living in the community and I am witnessing, people coming to my house, a child telling you, we are 9 children and 6 adults living in a house. I'm like, where do you sleep? How big is the house? And so if we are not able to address the issue to the core where it's happening, we are going to recreate this, the cycle of violence that's happening. And and I think even the one thing also, the teenage parents don't know how to really parent. And so how do we come on board, to bring about something that needs to be unique, to them, because they are not like we used to be. And so that's the disjuncture as well, because they think the way they parent children is the right way. And we see, how they are actually, also leading this life, because it's a life of social media. It's a life of being this tickless parent. As long as my child have a pair of Nikes on, the child is well dressed, but the child's, self-esteem and all of the other issues that the children deal with, identity, is being shaded with this thing, because the child now has to go with that image of the parents. And I think these are the kinds of, issues from grassroots level that we really need to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Betsy Daniels from Manenberg. We really appreciate your inputs, and this is precisely why it's important for us to bring home, literally into our homes and our communities, this important piece of legislation and action plan. But we want to go to the teams, 2 people in teams, and then we're going to come back into this room. So hold your question, Pam and others, for a second. So we're starting with Honorable Noma French Mbombo, followed by Honorable Aisha Kassim. When you're ready.
Yeah. Thank you very much, the chair, and thank you for the presentation. We welcome the presentation, and I'm really apologizing for not being there. I've got some flu. I didn't want to spread it all over. As a health professional, I need to know best. But thank you very much. I'm there in spirit. The UN resolution 1325, more specifically coming to the provincial legislature, it's not all being welcomed. I think for me it's long overdue. More specifically on the involvement of the civil society. Why is it so much important for us in the province? As is alluded, that it's not only about the threat of the human security that affect the GBVF, but the issue of the gangsterism and inequality that needs to be addressed. And also we need to look in terms of how we, as the members of this legislature, to utilize this opportunity. If you look at the UN SRC pillars, talks about the participation, the protection, the prevention, and the relief and the recovery. So how can we be able to do more than just having a conversations in the house sitting? For example, we do participate in other platforms internationally. Like we are the member of the Commonwealth Women Parliament, which has got 8 regions. Africa is one of those. And in most of these regions, whether it's in Asia or South Asia or is the Americanas and the Caribbean, the whole issue of the security and the human security and the threats, most specifically around women, is always being part of those. And we are supposed to be sitting some time to have one of the requirements from this Commonwealth Parliament on how we can use the Parliament to fast track some of those. And it's more specifically in the domestication of UN 1325. So for me, I just want to welcome that. I just hope that is not the end of it. We will going to keep on having all this conversation, because South Africa, it cannot be still. We are the part of the ones that they've got the highest form of violence. And yet we have got so many of the representation, specifically of men, but noting it's not only for women's problem, but we've got a whole representation across our parliaments, not only the NA, but across parliaments. But yet to find that we have got all of this violence that is happening. So for me, as the representative of on behalf of the Western Cape Parliament, at the Commonwealth Parliaments across the internationally, I welcome this, and I'm looking forward to make sure that the Agenda 2063, the SDGs, the everything that forms part of this, and the leaving no one behind in regard to not leaving as the civil society behind. As we always say, I hear that Jackie Thomas is also there, Barbara Russ is also there. These are the people we used to fight quite a lot with them, where we say nothing about us without us. So I'm looking forward to work with you again, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Bombo. You are one of our very popular politicians in the province. We appreciate your grassroots work in particular, which we always see on social media, especially. We're going to go to. We are now going to have Honorable Aisha Kassim. It appears that this legislature is very active on social media. Honorable Aisha Kassim, please.
Thank you very much.
In the house here that it's because there's so many young people in the legislature. Honorable Kassim, we are all yours.
No problem. Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much for the presentation as well. I'd just like to add to what one of the previous speakers has said, specifically looking at areas like Manenberg and Mitchell's Plain. Speaker, women and children will continue to be held hostage in areas like that for as long as we don't prioritize dealing with the root causes of drugs and gangsterism that was obviously pumped into our communities during apartheid. Now, as much as our mothers and our sisters are trying to get out of that nightmare in which they endure daily, when the time comes to stand up against those who hold them hostage in gang violence, it's unfortunate that many of our mothers and our sisters will find themselves in this situation where they are forced to side with those who are killing their kids instead of with the police and the community who wants to bring about change in those areas. And then we ask ourselves why, because reality is that while there is no proper intervention on dealing with poverty, unemployment, and the root causes of drugs and gangsterism in such communities, we will always get many residents in such communities who will run to protect the very same gangsters when the police steps in. Because just like many women are stuck and forced in an abusive relationship because the finance is obviously coming from the abusive partner, the same here with the residents in gang-infested communities who will side with those killing their own, because the reality is that these gangs provide food and shelter in some cases. Now, while there's no proper intervention on poverty and unemployment in such areas, even programs like the previous speaker have said that deals with gender-based violence. And it's unfortunate, Chairperson, because we will always look at policing to counter violence, drugs, and gangsterism instead of looking at the root causes, once again, of underdevelopment, like no investment in education as just one example. Because if we look at areas like Mitchell's Plain, Langa, Manenberg, at how children struggle to get placement in schools on the Cape Flats. And we must remember that every child not in school is a potential recruit for gangs and for drug activity. So mine is just to re-emphasize that we really need to pump more into prioritizing the root causes of those issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kassim, and you're getting a good round of applause there for your inputs, it being very insightful and driving us, compelling us to action. We are now going to take a few hands in the house. We're starting with Pam. Please say your name and a little bit about yourself, not too much, and then your input. Thank you, Pam.
My name is Pam Zogufa from Zogufa Media Productions. I'm a filmmaker as well as an activist against gender-based violence, but that did not make me immune to gender-based violence. As a woman, gender-based violence starts from home. Like now, my father passed on, and male in the family decided that they will take his house, they will take his land, and I'm the one who's dispossessed. And our policies do not make men to be afraid of the law. they make them delay the law, and by the time they're delaying the law, they're enjoying the fruits of my father's house, my land. They're enjoying everything that my father worked for. And they will take it and make it as if it's I'm a woman and I'm married. I'm not supposed to inherit anything. So what are our policies as South Africa, as a new South Africa? What are our policies that will change that, not dispossess? I'm hearing everyone talking about moving women and putting them in shelters. How about men being moved away from that land, moved away from what they are, fighting to steal from women? So that by the time I'm sitting there, I'm waiting for the law to take its course. They are enjoying it. They're enjoying the land. They're enjoying the finances. And I'm far away from that. And yet women are the one, and children, because I've moved with my son. Women and children, they are the ones suffering in all this instance. So I'm asking our government to actually change the laws against the perpetrators, rather than saying we are taking these women to put them in safety. And I've realized that I'm not the only one who is in this problem. In Guguletu, there are women also who are also fighting for their homes, and they are scared. They are really afraid of, talking about these things. And yet in South Africa, as much as we are one country that we said we are peaceful, but we're not talking about these matters. We're putting them under the carpet. And we say, I think as a Black woman in South Africa, when you talk about your situation, they say you're embarrassing the family. And yet you are dying silently. And imagine, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a journalist, but I'm not immune to gender-based violence. I thank you.
Thank you, Pam. That illustrates the disjuncture in various pieces of legislation and the governance of that legislation. For example, the rules that govern traditional authorities, which is supporting the usurpation of Pam's inherited ancestral land, and patriarchy being very rife in rural areas. It's a common thing that women's lands and property get expropriated. But we are delighted to have Advocate and Commissioner for Gender Equality, Seham Sehamaye. And I promised Pam that I would refer this very interesting case to Seham and brief you fully on the matter. So I think Barbara Russ's hand was next. See, this is what we do in practice. We have a problem and we fix it by coming together, all of us, instantly. Barbara Russ, all the way from Atlantis. Thank you for driving 50 kilometers to us. Turn your mic on.
Bernadette, thank you. Thank you for everybody being present here today and giving me an opportunity. You know what? Sometimes when you get a platform, you must use it. So on that basis and what I've heard, but what I deal with every day, from Atlantis to anywhere in the city, in Malmesbury, you mentioned it, I'm there. I just want to add this. I've been taking stock of myself, of my own personal life, being an international peace ambassador as well. I have a lot of time to think about myself and first sort myself out in my thinking before I carry it over. But for quite some time, this has been haunting me. We, as the mothers, we as the women, did give birth to these boys, and these boys became men. So where did we fail, or where did we as mothers, as women, left the open gap for all this that is happening today? I think sometimes our focus is to over us and not to the resolution of what can we do better or what can we change as a parent. Because everywhere, even like I gave twice a week, I give out food and soup and stuff to everybody. But most of them are little boys. Now I'm looking at these little children, boy children, what is becoming for them? What does the future holds for them when they are grown up? What role? I think it's time that we as women must also examine ourselves and look where are the gaps and how can we fill some of these gaps. And we need to have more conversations with one another as women and even with and make peace with what we are dealing with, because you know what, if we carry the burden together it will be lighter. But we are so over focused on domestic violence, GBV. It has become a fashion. Now, the more we call that word, the more it comes into existence and it gets to us. Our people become victims and stay victims. And the child that grows up under a victim mentality, mother or parents, also at a later stage think it's normal. It's abnormal. It's abnormal to be a victim. It's abnormal to abuse. But it's in Afrikaans the word is, die moeder se tong is die kind se verstand. I believe that because I
Please
am a
translate it into English for others, please. Die moeder se tong, the mother's tongue.
The mother's tongue is the child's mind. Because you give birth to that boy and you raise that child, you and your husband, or you even many times alone as well. Can't you pick up some signs? What we need to say to ourselves and even to our government, and that's why I'm mentioning it here, is that they must make more help available when that little boy is showing signs of rebellion, because as they grow up, we can see sometimes they want to pull the side. I'm living with my grandchildren and I see it in them as well. Then I caution them. I have peace talks with them and it helps. It calms them. It gives them direction. So ladies, mothers, grandmothers, and young women, examine yourself. Are we part of the problem or are we part of the solution? Because if we are part of the solution, then we must really get together as we are getting together, and as we can sometimes get together in church. Let's really examine ourselves and see, revisit what we did, because we can't just live in this cycle. The world is round, but we don't have to live around in a circle. We must have direction, and we must direct our generations for futures to come. So somewhere, we as women must examine ourselves, because I feel and I think we are failing. Because if we are not failing, we won't have all the sad stories, all these negative attacks. And yes, we complain about the gangsters, but I want to share with this house today. I talk to them. And I've been always talking to them. Before I entered politics, I went to the jails and I was giving talks. I was reaching out to them. And one day when I was down and out, visiting Mohammedsbury's correctional services, I was crying because one of my boys was on drugs. That convicts there, there were over 200, they did comfort me. And some of them did change, because I keep contact with the people that I reach out to. So we must do certain new things. You know what? The more we utter the words, the more it becomes realities, people. Let's start to think positive. And if we start to think positive, we will do positive things and we will be able to deal with whatever comes. And in that way, we can change what needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for that inspiring input in terms of thinking positive, acting positive. We have the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation here, followed by the young person over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simone Naidu. I'm from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. I am so happy to hear someone sharing or highlighting failing our boys, because that is something that kept coming up as I was listening to the speakers and the presentations. And I wrote this question down. Is the reality of us or our failing our women in our society a reflection of how we are failing our boys? And often boys are brought up in a society to be masculine, to not express their emotions, and often then drawn to strong emotions of expressing anger and violence and so forth. So whilst we put a lot of energy into fighting and preventing violence against women and children, I think it's also equally important that we um, invest in our boys, in creating spaces whereby they can also reflect and perhaps also ask the questions as to what are they sitting with, and acting out in society, where they learned it, what were they not able to express in their childhood, the trauma that they've dealt with, that they were denied expressing that. What are they sitting with, and why is it that such violence and the decisions that they make in life come about, and that how that impacts our society. So thank you so much. I think it's a very good start to self-reflection, even as woman, as a mother myself, and with a son. I mean, since I've became a mom, I always wondered, how can I teach my son differently? And what does he learn, not only from me, how I stand up for myself, but also in terms of negotiating peace and so forth, even in our household and our family. And what does he learn from his father? How to debate, how to argue, how to deal with difference of opinions, but also how to express himself and advocate for himself and to stand up for others as well. So yes, I think very important that we do self-reflection and to understand what our oversights are, what is it that, what are the root causes, and also that actually also make our kids vulnerable to become gang members, but they might not know that they've got a choice in having a brighter future as well, not just for themselves but for their families. They might not believe that they deserve a family or that they deserve anything better in life because they haven't seen anything like that, or even in fact heard anything. No one has ever asked them, what would you like to do, you know? But at the same time, if we don't allow, or if we don't allow our boys to also express their full emotions like women are very intuitive, then yes, we make it very difficult for them to be greater men and to be honorable men and to make better decisions for themselves and in society. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Please, and introduce yourself to us. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Sabrina. I'm the founder and executive director of Women for Change, an organization that advocates, educates, and raises awareness against gender-based violence. First of all, I would really like to thank you for everyone acknowledging the urgency that we're facing with gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. But I think acknowledgement is no longer enough anymore. We really need action. While policies and the National Strategic Plan are great on paper and probably one of the best legislation in the world, it also only exists on paper. I'm talking to survivors, girls, women, and a lot of families of femicide cases every single day. And I can tell you, they don't feel any of that impact. I want to mention something. In South Africa, between April 2023 and March 2024, 5,578 women were killed. To just put this into perspective, according to the latest UN report on femicide, in Europe, with a population of 745 million people, there only recorded 2,300 femicide cases in the same year. So we're sitting in South Africa with a country that is 12 times smaller than an entire continent, with double the numbers on women who are murdered. How can this not be a national disaster? In April this year, I handed over a petition at the Union Building to the Deputy Minister of Women, Children and People with Disabilities, handing over this petition declaring gender-based violence and femicide a national disaster. 5 days later, the GBV Blitz was announced by our government. Once again, something that had no impact. Personally, I don't even know what it was about. I haven't gotten a report on it. And until today, absolute silence with a petition that now stands with over 200,000 signatures. So it's not just me complaining. It's not just other nonprofit organizations, activists, women and children in this country. It's 200,000 people that want this to be declared. So I asked in this room to please feel the urgency on the ground. Stop working in silos. Speak to the people in the communities and really understand how urgent this is if we also look around and what is happening worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lavina. It echoes what Nazizwa had said earlier about the importance of declaring a national and provincial state of disaster pertaining to the murder of women and children. We're going to have Soraya Naya, and then we're going to go to Gillian Bosman afterwards, Honorable Bosman. And that makes you dishonorable, Soraya.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Soraya Naya.
Thank you very much. A lot of mixed feelings and mixed emotions. I mean, I really like the conversation that took place here, but I'm also quite disheartened by where the conversation is still located. We're still seeming to convince ourselves, that we need to have inclusive conversations. And if it's happening at this level, this very mature level, it's really, really worrying that we still need to be convinced that we need to have inclusive conversations. There's also a lot of celebrations around what's happening and what's being done and kind of policies in place and how women are in charge of neighborhood watches and whatever. But the reality is, as the statistic supports, that we're clearly not getting it right. Whatever we're doing, we're farting in the wind. So something needs to happen. And if I think about the conversations, on the different parts, on the one hand, government is saying we're open to inclusion, we want civil society involvement. Civil society, on the other hand, people are reporting saying we want to be involved, but there's all these barriers. And so what they're needing to look at, like, what's happening. And also for me, when there's celebration about some 80-odd-year-old woman being part of a neighborhood watch, it breaks my heart. I don't think it's a cause of celebration. I mean, that woman should be sitting at home and enjoying the last parts of whatever life she has available. Women will also carry, we do know, massive burdens around income generation in terms of childcare, home care, elderly care, and then still to expect women to go and, heaven forbid, go and do neighborhood marches at 11 o'clock at night. The other thing, of course, that we're not talking about is, I agree in terms of the focus that really needs to be on men. In fact, this conversation should be largely focused on men, right? Because what we are seeing is the very victims to kind of mobilize ourselves, to kind of go on marches, and create policies where, in fact, the statistics that came out yesterday that says up to 60% of women who are exposed to violence of any kind are at the hands of people that they are known, mostly their partners, right? And others that they know. So it's above 60%. And yet we're talking about women that should be doing stuff. And the other, so really for me, the focus really, there's been large emphasis on the perpetrators, not the one. Of course, there's going to be emphasis in terms of how do we protect ourselves, what service available to us as women. But really, the perpetrators, they clearly need help. And then just one other thing is, when we look at the statistics and Oudtshoorn and the surprise around Oudtshoorn and other places, in fact, one of the common denominator around all these places, poor Black areas, right? And that, of course, must then start raising questions around causes. Why is it happening there? And of course, when we talk about policies that need to be locally connected and as well as, of course, internationally connected. The reality is we in South Africa come from a history of apartheid, where there's been large-scale violence, injustice, economic injustice. And
And so when we're looking at men as well, it's not just talking about men as perpetrators, as, these people are that need to be incarcerated, because that's now, there's a lot of men, poor black men, who have no sense of self-worth, like whose sense of self is zero. So if I, as a man, if this is how I feel, if there's no prospect of any future for me, no sense of value, how am I supposed to respect women? And so if we're not looking at the systemic injustice, we talk about generational transfer. It's not just generational transfer of what's happening today and what will happen tomorrow, but what about our generational transfer of the trauma, of the injustice, of the poverty that we all suffer with, and particularly people of color, and particularly men. And so some of what we experience as gender-based violence now is not just about, and if we're only focusing on the symptoms, we're not actually going to get to the root. So 25 years is a long time. And if we're now talking about war against women, like, how are things going to change? If this is the conversation that we're having, no doubt this conversation was had 10 years ago, 15 years ago. At the inception, 25 years ago, there must have been a whole lot of hope. And for me, the conversation still seemed to be the same. And so something we need to look at that needs to change. And for me, one of the things is root causes and looking at a systemic, holistic approach to the problem, which is not just about having, so the idea around having, in fact, I don't even know why we still need to hear women's voices. Like, we know the problem. It's widespread. The statistics is all we need to go to. Like, we don't need any more marches. So we really need to get our act together, both as government and as civil society, but we need to kind of figure out a different way forward. I think we need to flip the script. Thank you.
That speaks wisdom. Must I take the speaker before the chief whip? Oh, the chief whip and then the speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benedict. And I think I don't want to say I concur with the previous speaker, because that's what we do in the House all the time. But as I was listening to the conversation as well, one of the things that sort of keeps on recurring to me when we look at how we celebrate the contribution of women, and it's not just a South African phenomenon, it's an international development phenomena, where we've identified resilience as a badge of honor, because we want to congratulate people for being resilient, but we immediately erase the fact that with resilience comes sacrifice, struggle, and a whole lot of pain to be able to celebrate women as being resilient. And I think as part of flipping the script, we also have to say that you cannot just celebrate that people are resilient without taking into consideration what they actually had to sacrifice to become resilient. And it's a conversation that we've had with a lot of what we called child rights monitors. As part of the Commissioner for Children in the Western Cape, a big part of the Commissioner's program is having children actually monitor how government is doing. And as part of our work in Parliament, we are about to go into the annual report season in our next quarter. And what's very sort of exciting has been in the last 3 years, the child rights monitors have actually interpreted departmental annual reports from a child's perspective. And they've created posters and they've done workshops with the department, with the commissioner. And it's so interesting how what the government presents as to how well they're doing and what the children interpret how well. And I'm going to use an example like the Department of Local Government, for instance, because I found that very interesting, and the Provincial Treasury. There was such a massive disjuncture between what children actually perceive service delivery to be and where it affected them and what we deliver. And I don't think as lawmakers, we've thought enough about how do we need to change the type of questions we need to ask. I have asked someone from my office just to get some of the literature from the Children's Commissioner so we can share that as well. But I do also want to say that we have to remember that South Africa is sort of technically termed as a post-conflict society, but in actual fact, we are sort of well within conflict still. And I agree with the previous speaker, we cannot forget why our society is still struggling with conflict and why violence plays such a big role. But we also have to look at how do we encourage people to change the way that programs are developed, especially when we're developing programs that addresses how we engage with children, how police officers engage with victims of violence at a police station, how a victim of abuse and rape is dealt with at a clinic or at a community level. How do we change the way those programs are designed, and how those programs are delivered? And also, what type of agency do we give to young men? Because we've seen with the youth programs that are successful, and I'm going to use the Chrysalis Academy as an example, where you give young people an opportunity to use their agency, they make better decisions. And they've shown that they can be multipliers of change in their communities because they are able to use peer education to, at some points, just encourage other young people to do better, and at most points, recruit other young people to participate. And I think what I sort of want to close on is to say, I want to ask that as our civil society partners here, you really look at what is scheduled to happen in this building. We've got a parliamentary program it's updated once a week. And you look at the types of standing committees that have public participation during the annual report season, during the upcoming adjustment budget season, during the strategic planning sessions, and also even directly engage the chairpersons and the committee secretaries via email. And you ask questions about the items on the agenda. And we really need to start getting more civil society conversations during those public participation processes. Because when the government tells us, this is what we're budgeting for because our research tells us this is what we need to do, when we've got nobody else in the room, we've got the same people in the room giving the same perspectives. That's very often what we work from. And we are spread across constituencies in this province, and we've got that lens, but we don't always have the technical knowledge in terms of what is an actual budget or an action plan look like to address those issues. So I want to encourage all of you to look at how we increase that level of participation. And very often, for me, the most meaningful form of participation is not always in a committee room or in a formal parliamentary process. It's a cup of coffee. It's an invitation to an event. Because I do think that as much as we try and improve our public education and outreach, we've got a long way to go to actually make sure that we incorporate the voices of civil society and the voices of communities in a meaningful way. And we also need to look at how does that filter down to a local level, because we must be honest that the way we design communities from a spatial planning perspective and from a resource allocation perspective contributes to perpetuating violence in certain communities. The way we and how, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's studying planning at UCT, and she was telling me how excited she is. And I said, have you done a course on social justice? And she said, no, why? And I said, because do you think apartheid was developed by politicians only? You needed spatial planners to develop the infrastructure. And as we're developing communities, we have to ask ourselves, how do you do that kind of mapping? And what's really interesting when you engage with young people, whether it's the Junior City Council of the City of Cape Town or the Children's Commissioners of Children, they are the ones who tell you, how could you build a park there, the field where the gangsters play? Because that's their playground, it's not ours. They're the ones who say, why is my school over there and I have to walk over this field when there was space for the school to be built here? And why is it that the city is not talking to the province when you decide when you're going to put a hospital or a school, or when you're going to build a housing project, but you didn't consider that actually those kids have to go to school? And it's so interesting when you start thinking, like, how is it that 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds are thinking about social justice and spatial planning, but we're not? And it's because of the way we've been conditioned to read information, and also because sometimes we don't have all the tools. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Gillian, for that important insight. We're going to go to our Honourable Speaker and then Sunil.
And no, I think I'm mostly covered by the two previous speakers, because I think the speaker before the chief whip said I can't believe we're having this conversation 25 years later. And when I opened the session, my appeal was that when we leave here today, that there's action plans. The secretary and I had various discussions yesterday, but one of them was that we cannot do things for ticking boxes. We cannot, because it's August, commemorate Women's Month because it's August. I mean, we and in particular as a parliament that I lead, that I have the privilege to lead, we're not going to tick boxes in this parliament. So my appeal is that with civil society, because we clearly do not have all the answers, because otherwise we would not have still be having this conversation. And I think the chief whip touched on programs, and perhaps that's something that as parliament and as members of parliament we need to dissect. And is it really working? Is it really penetrating in our communities? And so something needs to change. That's the one point. And then the last point, we are also going to, so last year, was it last year or the year before, we launched Men's Parliament in the Western Cape. And this year we'll do a Boys Parliament that will be before Men's Parliament. And I think it would also be a great opportunity to invite this audience to that engagement, because I can tell you that even at the Men's Parliament session, men admits that men are failing boys, or the boy child that ultimately is in most cases, let me not generalize, in most cases are the perpetrators in society. So Secretary, if we could extend that invitation to that conversation so that we continue, that we actually get to an action plan so that we can actually deal with the scourge, and not next year because it happens to be August that we have another thing on the parliamentary program, because it's about ticking a box. Thank you very much.
Honourable Speaker, thank you for that. Compelling us to act. It's very inspiring, and we're going to look to our Secretary of Parliament to help us with that. Thank you so much. So we have Sonal Fushir, followed by Nazima Muhammad. If anybody else would like to make input, raise your hand.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to be short because I think the speaker basically covered me. I'm Sunal Fushir. I'm the Director of Public Engagement for the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. And yeah, as the speaker said, we have started with a men's parliament, moving into boys' parliament, it being growing better men, improving the quality of men that we have in South Africa. But then also something that a number of people mentioned, and that is scratching me, is I remember in 2019, the Western Cape Provincial Parliament facilitated a women's parliament with delegates from all the various regions and districts in the Western Cape. And all the recommendations from those parliaments are filtered through to the work of Parliament into the oversight of government. And yet, 6 years later, the same issues are raised. I clearly remember, and I know, Member Philander, you still spoke, made a keynote address at that Women's Parliament. The issue of how government treats the victim versus the perpetrator, the amount of money per day given to women in shelters. I think at that point it was 72 Rand versus 400 Rand for a perpetrator in prison. So the dichotomy of what government spends on the perpetrator versus the victim. And here we are 6 years later, and it's the same thing that is coming up. So what is changing? Or are we just getting together regularly to talk about it and then we just move on? Sorry, thanks.
That's extremely insightful, using the comparison between the cost of supporting victims versus the perpetrators in prison. Thank you for that. Nazima Mohammed, followed by Lindiwe Khoza.
I want to introduce another aspect of the challenges we face and the repetition of the challenges we face. One of the reasons I see as responsible for the repetition is the dominant narrative in the countries and globally around racism, around sexism, around patriarchy. And I raise this, and I'll provide an example of that narrative. In 2017, I was a on the Transformation Steering Committee appointed by Bladen Zamande for higher education. And he then gave the responsibility of leading a national plan on gender-based violence in universities to the Deputy Minister, Mduduzi Manana. Now, I don't know if you remember Mduduzi Manana. He beat up a woman in a nightclub. And why? Because she called him gay. I mean, this is the deputy minister who was given the responsibility of leading the national plan for universities on gender-based violence. Okay, so what we have is a dominant narrative and we have rhetoric. And it was extremely disturbing. But he is not a unique case. There are people like that in all our governing structures, in all of management, in parliaments, in provincial legislatures, in national legislature. And the issue for me is, how does one change the dominant narrative? How do you move that? And since I've worked in universities for over 30 years, I can tell you that we've invested greatly in knowledge development, in the knowledge project around gender equity, around racism, around classism, structural inequality. We've invested in it, but not enough. We need to do more investment, and we need to make sure that the investment in the knowledge created and our understanding of why oppression occurs and what it is we can do to change is infused into professional development, into leadership development. If we don't make those connections with education, right from the people who do the research, right down to basic education and early childhood education, where knowledge becomes a way of challenging the dominant narrative, we're not going to change. We actually need to acknowledge that the dominant narrative and those who are empowered by it won't change because they're empowered by it. How are you going to change if you don't have a reason to? If you benefit from the position, the status quo? And so how do you create the pockets of intervention that are necessary? And unless we think about that in a systemic way, a systematic way, and start changing that, how we parent. I was on a school governing body, and one of probably the best public schools in Johannesburg. And you know, there wasn't corporal punishment, but when children did things that were inappropriate, it was such a punitive system. You know, school governing bodies don't know how to govern around social justice issues, but they're not trained. When are we going to train these people, you know, so they can lead? And so these are the issues for me. Thank you. I'm getting emotional about it.
We can see it, and deservedly so for 30 years of work in this sector. Thank you, Nazima. We are going to Lindy Wakosa.
Yeah. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, members of Parliament, and civil society organizations gathered here. I would like to bring your attention to the Peace Charter, the South African National Peace Charter, which is a document that we provided in the pack. We are here, as mentioned earlier on, about South Africa's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which was adopted by Cabinet in August 2020. And yes, as Honourable Speaker, I do acknowledge that we need to move away from tick box exercises where we are adopting in specific calendar months. But then what the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security has done is brought together government officials and civil society on an action on peace and security for the women of South Africa. And the past 5 years, much has been achieved, and we've identified gaps as well. obviously successes and challenges that are going to be highlighted in the new NEP, which is being renewed and would be launched in the few coming months. But I wanted to highlight the Peace Charter as a document that emanated from this action plan. This was one of the deliverables. And this Peace Charter reaffirms our shared responsibility to uphold justice, dignity, and nonviolence. It reminds us that peace is not a domain for one sector. It's not a civil society charter. It's not a woman's charter. It's a charter that belongs to all South Africans, and it's a testament to the ongoing work that civil society has been doing in advancing social cohesion, healing, and a shared responsibility. And therefore, when you engage on the charter, we would respectfully like to ask that you forward the document and use it to engage further. It does really share a vision, and it also aspires to our shared purpose and responsibility as a collective. And so would like to invite you to engage this further. It has been shared across since it was launched. And we would like to present this to Parliament and South Africans alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any further hands here or online? If not, we're going to move to way forward, and we'll start with the Secretary to Parliament. She says she's new, but she's 1 month old already. Rashida Beg.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very thought-provoking engagements. And I'm going to go back to the day I went to the Speaker and I said, Speaker, there's a request for us to have a conversation around United Nations Resolution 1325. And before I went to the Speaker's office, I actually thought to myself, what do we as the Western Cape Provincial Parliament have to do with UN Resolution 1325? Because normally international agreements are dealt with at national parliaments. So between the NA and the NCOP, in terms of the Constitution, Section 214, there's a process where these agreements are endorsed. But I had one foot in Parliament not too long ago as the Division Manager Core Business Support, and there we've actually agitated for more thorough engagements around international resolutions. I see Jackie Thomas is smiling there at the back. Part of our agitation was, do citizens know about all these agreements that we sign? Do they know what the impact of it is? So we sign an AGOA deal, but what does AGOA mean for a chicken farmer in a rural community? So to what extent do we actually take these international agreements and we use a nice word, domesticated, but get everybody in South Africa to understand that we've actually signed this document, and this is what this document means for Sunel, for Bernadette, for Speaker Dalen. How does it impact our lives? So all of these nice agreements are signed. We all hear today that this particular resolution is 25 years old, but what have we done about it? So one of the inputs here is we're having the same circular conversations. And that's what it is. It's circular conversations. Because let's hope, touch wood, that we're not going to be here in 5 years' time and have the same conversation. So the conversation today needs to give us a clear way forward. So where do we take this? How do we deal with this? At least at the level where we're responsible for at the provincial level. What stood out for me is how the conversation started with the UN resolution. When we came to the colleagues in the Western Cape government, giving us a sense of how the provincial government is dealing with it. Then the honourable members focused on oversight. And I must say, I was very pleased in terms of the enthusiasm and the way in which honourable members took on board this particular resolution and actually broke it down into the different portfolios that they are responsible for. And that's exactly what needs to happen. How do we take this international resolution and make it part and parcel of committee work and committee oversight? And some of the reflections is that committee oversight is the bridge. And that is the role that this provincial parliament has to play, particularly in terms of representing the interest of citizens. And I'm saying citizens, I'm not saying women. because we know what the conversation went about in terms of, is the issue really about women, or is it about the whole of society that needs to look at how do we address gender-based violence and how do we address peace and security of women in its totality? But the conversation went on, and then we had brought in the arts. And it's interesting how an art display capturing what we were all discussing here took us to another dimension of discussing how artists portray women and the struggles that women have gone through. But through art, we can also create solutions and see how we can move this conversation forward. From the arts, we got a lived experience in Meidenberg. What is really happening? So we worked from the UN headquarters, and we've gone now to Meidenberg. And in Meidenberg, we see the lived reality of how this resolution should actually not be displaying itself. So the question is, again, what is the solution? We have members of parliament here that are clearly committed to take this resolution up, to take it in their respective portfolios. They alone are not going to do it. Conversations came, and thank you very much for your input. I was quite surprised that you brought in climate change. But again, how does climate change affect society? How does climate change affect women? How does climate change affect rural communities? The solution to this problem doesn't sit in a department. It doesn't sit in a colleagues that are there from the Western Cape government. It's a solution that this whole room needs to talk about. And it's this whole room that needs to take this matter forward, particularly our civil society organizations. I'm happy to tell you, Sonali APP's actually got a target that says we must engage more with civil society organizations. We must open up the floors of parliament where more of these voices are heard, because you are at the coalface of experience that citizens have. And perhaps at the level where members come from different communities, we may not have the experience of Meidenberg, and that needs to be placed on the agenda in the provincial parliament. So I think Speaker has given the invitation already. Chief Whip is not here anymore, but he has also given that invitation. Please follow the program of this institution. This institution does not exist without the people that it represents. This is not just a 5-year cycle and then we go back to the ballot box and we decide whether we want Speaker Dalen back or we don't want him back. This is an exercise where we need to start building a country. And I'm going to reflect back to the work that former President Kgalema Motlanthe did with the high-level panel. And I had, I would say, the honor of supporting that program for the public participation component. So when the high-level panel was appointed by the Speakers Forum, just to do an analysis of all these beautiful laws that we've passed since 1996, and just to see in 2017, what was the effect of all the laws that we have passed? How did it reduce poverty? How did it improve unemployment in the country? How did it address issues around social cohesion? How did it address the imbalance in terms of economies and where the wealth of the country is actually sitting? And it was starting to not only read the data and the information out of this high-level panel exercise, but there was a simple message. Laws were passed by Parliament. Laws are also passed at provincial legislatures. But we've never followed up to see what is the impact of those pieces of legislation. It's no different to having an NSP currently. It's been passed. What has happened to it? So that's the challenge, I think, for the honourable members on this side of the House, is to make sure that we regularly engage with these laws that we pass and to make sure that we follow up and to see whether they are effective and not effective. And I think the message that President Motlanthe, former President Motlanthe at that day said, we really create beautiful and wonderful frameworks. We're very good at developing policy. We're very poor at implementation. And a stern message came through is Parliament, provincial legislatures, you need to pull up your socks. You need to be able to go back to those policies, regulations, the laws that have been passed. Go and speak to citizens and ask them, are you experiencing the benefit of this piece of legislation? So from the legislature's perspective, that is our role. And that is a role I'm sure that we are fully committed. We have got a team at the back who's taken detailed notes and was going to create a report, but it's not going to be one of those reports, Speaker, hopefully, that's going to gather dust on a platform. I do think there's a need for this collective to come back at some stage and say, we've had this conversation, what has changed? But apart from what has changed, what is it that we are doing differently to obtain a different result and not walk that circular path again? Thank you.
Yeah, Rashida Beg, you're so inspiring. And between the Speaker, Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of this Parliament, to note that National Parliament has not yet had this engagement, but you took this on so readily and ran with it in this beautiful and powerful way. And that we're still waiting for National Parliament to have us, as well as, to then do the other legislatures. So again, forward thinking. What's exciting in particular is that you want action, and we look forward to further engagement with you. From civil society perspective, we will have another meeting in partnership during October, a civil society-led meeting in perhaps Community House in Salt River, the old site of the anti-apartheid struggle. And we want you to come and sit in the plastic chairs with us and engage with us in that particular way. So that would be fantastic if we continue our engagement. And it really, from our side and from my side, it's been a privilege and an honor to work with all of you. Thank you for being so forward-thinking, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. We mustn't forget our Honourable Deputy Speaker, Regan Allen, is going to thank you all. Please go ahead, sir.
It's very alarming to some of my colleagues that this would be the first time that you are actually hearing my voice today. I was very deliberate. I wanted to absorb and listen attentively because the work we do in Parliament is so vital. I'm fully aware that we have Hansard, and it's so good to be in your presence, ma'am. We have Hansard, which is the official verbatim record of Parliament, and I've done a quick word count on the last 5 sittings. And I've established that over the last 5 sittings in this Western Cape Provincial Parliament, on average, 28,500 words were said. On average, over the last 5 sittings. Speaker is very clear that those words mustn't merely remain words. It must lead to action. So when we consider oversight, we are very clear. I listened to Member Kaiser Philander and all the members that spoke that our oversight must lead to better service delivery. It must lead to tangible change within communities. And when I listened, I almost wanted to say Auntie Patsy, because it was an Auntie Caroline that gave me certain essentials when I lived at GC Williams' house back in the day, being taken out of Mitchell's Plain because of violence, because of drug abuse. So that lived experience is so real that we need to make sure that as Parliament in lawmaking, and the Secretary just eloquently spoke about our post-legislative scrutiny, how we need to ensure that there is that whole of government approach. And I'm delighted. So let me firstly say, let me get to the thanks. Speaker, thank you. Thank you that you have always opened the door. We can confirm that the Boys Parliament will happen in September. There will also be a number of RCLs and junior city councils that will also be engaged and invited, so that we ultimately take these messages of action back into our schools and where boys are actually playing, learning, and engaging in conversation. To our joint chairpersons of the session, thank you so much. To each and every chairperson, the leader of the official opposition, together with the chief whip and those that are online, thank you for your participation and for your inputs during this particular session. To those in government, thank you. Government is so vital because the lady earlier on mentioned that there's a risk to governance if we operate in a silo approach. And we are so aware that that whole of government approach is vital so that each and every department having a role in terms of their strategic plan towards safety, and they need to be held accountable. The same way us as members of parliament also need to be held accountable. So please know that you are able to engage us, that you are able to email us, call us if there is any particular matter that you would want to be and that you would want to see be addressed in a community, or if it's a broader matter. Also to the DG that has since left, thank you to him as well. And I'm standing between you and lunch, but I cannot not say the following. We will work tirelessly towards making sure that there is not a silo approach, that the whole of government approach actually land within communities, because each and every department has that role. Each and every standing committee work not merely, ma'am, in terms of party political lines. They actually work towards the betterment of a entire department to make sure that service delivery actually happens. To our former president and deputy president, it was lovely listening to you as well. And thank you for making the time in your busy schedule to be with us. As I conclude, economies will collapse without the contribution of women. Families will crumble, communities will come to a standstill, and dare I say that this particular parliament will be unable to fulfill its mandate without the contribution of women. So I wish all of our women a blessed and safe rest of the entire year. And I dislike it only being a month because we have seen that where women lead and where women play a role, we as men are better. So thank you so much for the role that each and every woman is playing in society and in your own families and communities where you are.
Maybe just to all our guests, lunch will be served in the members' lounge. You can follow the lady with the red hair and the black jacket and the peach shirt. She will lead the way. Thank you very much.